The morning Selene Ward's life exploded, she had exactly 47 minutes to decide whether to fall apart or burn the world down. 3 hours ago, she found her fiancé in bed with the woman she'd trained herself. Now she's walking into the most important pitch of her career with mascara streaking her face and rage pooling in her chest. Across the table sits a man who built an empire on fear, and he's staring at her like he can see straight through the cracks. This is their story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this tale travels. The elevator smelled like expensive cologne in Celine's breaking point. She pressed herself against the mirrored wall, watching the numbers climb. 43rd floor, 44th, 45th. While her reflection told her everything she already knew. Mascara tracked down both cheeks in uneven lines. Her blouse was buttoned wrong. The portfolio case in her white-knuckled grip shook every 3 seconds like clockwork. Because that's how often her hands remembered what they'd seen at 6:17 this morning. Marcus tangled in hotel sheets with Lauren, the assistant Selene had personally mentored for 8 months. Both of them frozen in that uniquely ugly moment when cheaters realize they've been caught. 46th floor. Selene had walked out of that room without saying a word. Driven home in silence. Sat in her apartment for 20 minutes, staring at the engagement ring on her finger, a 2-carat reminder that she'd spent 3 years building a future with someone who couldn't even be bothered to rent a room farther than 6 blocks from her office. Then she'd looked at the clock, 7:45, and realized she had exactly 90 minutes before the Verelli meeting. So she'd chosen burning the world down. 47th floor. The elevator chimed. Doors whispered open onto a reception area that probably cost more than her entire annual salary. Glass and steel and that particular breed of silence that only existed in places where every square foot was purchased with ruthless ambition. A woman behind a floating marble desk looked up with the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Selene Ward for Damian Virelli," Selene said, and was genuinely impressed her voice came out steady. "Third conference room on your right." The receptionist's gaze flicked down to Selene's blouse, lingered on the mismatched buttons, then returned to her screen without comment. Selene made it 14 steps down the hall before she had to stop and lean against the wall. Her chest felt like it was caving in. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies where people clutched their hearts and collapsed into convenient arms. This was smaller and meaner, a steady compression that made every breath require conscious effort. She pressed her palm flat against the cool glass and counted to 10, then 20, then gave up counting and just focused on not vomiting onto $12,000 marble floors. "You can fall apart later," she told herself. "You have a meeting. You have one shot. You can fall apart after." She pushed off the wall and kept walking. The conference room waited at the end of the hall, all floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, like the city was something you could own if you stood high enough. Inside, 3 people sat around a table designed to accommodate 12. Selene recognized 2 of them from the research she'd done. Michael Chen, Verelli's CFO, mid-40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the permanent expression of someone calculating risk. Sophia Reeves, head of public relations, early 30s, sharp-featured and sharper dressed. The third person was Damian Virelli himself. Selene had seen photos, had studied his background until she could recite his portfolio in her sleep. Built his first company at 24, sold it at 28 for enough money to fund a small country, then spent the next decade acquiring and dismantling competitors with surgical precision. Healthcare, pharmaceuticals, medical technology. If it touched the industry, Verelli had a hand in it somewhere. The business magazines called him visionary. The people he'd destroyed called him something else. None of the photos had prepared her for the actual presence of him. He sat at the head of the table in a black suit that probably cost what she made in 3 months. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in old paintings of men who conquered cities. Mid-30s, maybe. Strong jaw, olive skin, eyes so dark they looked black from across the room. Those eyes locked onto her the second she walked through the door, and Selene felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "Ms. Ward." His voice matched the rest of him, low, controlled, carrying just enough accent to suggest Italian roots somewhere in his bloodline. "You're early." Traffic was better than expected. Selena set her portfolio on the table, managed not to drop it. "Thank you for seeing me. Sit." Not an invitation, a command wrapped in courtesy. Selene sat, Chen and Reeves exchanged a glance she couldn't quite read. Verelli hadn't stopped watching her. She could feel him cataloging details. The streaked makeup she'd tried to fix in the car and failed. The tremor in her hands she couldn't quite control. The blouse she'd buttoned in the wrong order because her fingers wouldn't stop shaking. "You look upset," Verelli said finally. Not a question. An observation delivered with the same clinical precision someone might use to comment on the weather. Celine's throat closed. She opened her mouth to deflect, to laugh it off, or pivot to business, or do literally anything except react honestly. But what came out instead was, "I'm fine." "No," Verelli said quietly. "You're not." The room went very still. Chen shifted in his seat. Reeves studied her manicured nails. Selene sat there feeling the entire carefully constructed shell she'd built on the drive over start to crack straight down the middle. "Mr. Virelli," she started, "who made you cry?" 3 words. Spoken so gently, they almost didn't sound like they'd come from a man rumored to have built his empire on calculated intimidation and strategic destruction. Selene felt something break loose in her chest. "That's..." Her voice fractured. She swallowed hard, tried again. "That's not relevant to the pitch." "I didn't ask if it was relevant." Verelli leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, hands loosely clasped. "I asked who made you cry." Every instinct Selene had screamed at her to shut this down, to redirect, to pull herself together and deliver the presentation she'd spent 3 months perfecting. This was the meeting that could save her career, the contract that would prove she deserved the promotion she'd been chasing for 2 years, the validation that all those 80-hour weeks and missed birthdays and sacrificed weekends had meant something. She could not afford to fall apart in front of Damian Virelli. "My fiancé," she heard herself say. Ex-fiancé. As of about 3 hours ago. Reeves's head snapped up. Chen's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy. Virelli's face didn't change at all. "What did he do?" "I'd rather not." "What did he do, Ms. Ward?" The question cut through every defense she had left. Maybe it was the gentleness in his voice. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple fact that she'd been holding everything together for so long that the second someone actually asked, the truth just spilled out. "I found him with my assistant this morning, in a hotel 6 blocks from my office." Selene's hands were shaking badly enough now that she had to press them flat against the table to keep them still. "I trained her myself, recommended her for the position. She sent me a birthday card last month." The silence that followed felt like broken glass. "I'm sorry," Selene said quickly, because this was insane. She was sabotaging herself. She needed to get control. "That was completely inappropriate. Can we start over? I have a presentation prepared." "No." Selene froze. "No? You're not in any condition to give a pitch right now." Verelli stood, and the motion carried enough quiet authority that everyone else in the room automatically straightened. "Chen, Reeves, give us the room." "Sir?" Chen's eyebrows rose. "Out." They left without another word. The door clicked shut, and suddenly Selene was alone with a man whose reputation suggested he'd probably dismantled companies for sport before breakfast. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She tried to stand, tried to salvage some shred of professionalism, but Verelli raised one hand in a gesture that somehow communicated both authority and reassurance. "Sit down, Ms. Ward." She sat. Verelli moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city like he was contemplating buying it. For a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Selene counted her heartbeats and tried to figure out what had just happened to her carefully planned morning. "I grew up in Brooklyn," Verelli said finally. "Red Hook. You know it?" "Not well. My father ran certain businesses out of a social club on Van Brunt Street, legitimate on paper, less so in practice." He turned to face her, and the light from the windows cast his features in sharp relief. "When I was 16, I watched him beat a man unconscious in our kitchen because the man had disrespected my mother at a grocery store, broke his jaw in 3 places, shattered his orbital socket. My mother cried for 2 hours afterward, not because she felt sorry for the man, but because she'd spent 20 years trying to teach her son that violence wasn't the answer to every problem. Selene had no idea what to say to that. "I learned 2 things that night," Verelli continued. First, that my father's world would destroy anyone soft enough to stay in it. Second, that my mother was right. Violence doesn't solve anything. It just creates more problems. He moved away from the windows, pulled out the chair next to Selene instead of returning to his position at the head of the table, sat down close enough that she could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. I spent the next 15 years building something separate from that world, something clean, legal, something my mother could be proud of before she died. I'm sorry for your loss, Selene said quietly. She died because we couldn't afford the treatment she needed. Verelli's expression didn't change, but something cold crept into his voice. Breast cancer, stage 3. Treatable, if you had the right insurance and the right doctors. We had neither. She died in a free clinic in Sunset Park while I sat in the hallway outside because they wouldn't let me in the room. Selene's chest ached. That's why I built this company, Verelli said. Not for money, not for power. Because the system that let my mother die while bureaucrats argued over coverage limits is still killing people every single day, and I'm going to burn it down and build something better from the ashes. He met her eyes. So when you walk into my office looking like your world just fell apart, I don't see weakness, Ms. Ward. I see someone who understands what it feels like when the people you trust destroy you. And I think you might actually give a damn about the work we're trying to do here. Selene felt tears burning behind her eyes and absolutely refused to let them fall. I do, she managed. Give a damn, I mean. That's why I wanted this contract so badly. Your foundation could change everything. Tell me why you think that. Because you're not trying to fix the system. You're building an entirely new one. The words came easier now, fueled by something stronger than her breaking heart. Everyone else in healthcare is playing defense, trying to negotiate with insurance companies, trying to work within existing frameworks. You're creating parallel infrastructure, free clinics funded by private capital, mobile medical units, partnerships with pharmaceutical companies to drive down medication costs. You're essentially building a shadow healthcare network that operates completely outside traditional channels. And you think that's viable long-term? I think it's the only thing that might actually work. Selene pulled her portfolio across the table, opened it to the projections she'd spent weeks developing. The current system is too entrenched, too profitable for too many people. You can't reform it from the inside, but you can build something beside it, something better, and force the whole industry to adapt or become irrelevant. Verelli leaned over to study her numbers. His proximity made Selene acutely aware of several things at once. The expensive scent of whatever cologne he wore, the controlled stillness of his posture, the way his attention felt like standing too close to an open flame. These projections assume significant scaling over 5 years, he said. Conservative scaling. I think you could move faster. Based on what data? Based on the fact that you've already built the model. Selene flipped to the next section, gaining confidence as she hit her stride. Your pilot program in Queens served 18,000 patients in 10 months. Your mobile units in the Bronx are running at capacity 6 days a week. You have a waiting list, you have demand. What you don't have is enough capital to scale at the speed people actually need you to. And your firm can provide that capital? We can broker it. We have relationships with philanthropic organizations, private equity firms interested in social impact investing, and several healthcare companies looking to offset their tax burden with strategic charitable contributions. She met his eyes. I can get you the funding to expand to 50 clinics in 3 years, but you need to move now before one of your competitors realizes what you're building and tries to copy the model. Verelli sat back, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. You came here devastated, he said. 30 minutes ago, you looked like you could barely hold yourself together. Now you're giving me the pitch of your life. How? Selene thought about lying, thought about giving him some polished answer about professionalism or compartmentalization. Because this matters more than he does, she said instead. Because I've spent 3 years building a life with someone who didn't care enough to be loyal, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let that stop me from doing the one thing I'm actually good at. She closed the portfolio. You asked who made me cry. The answer is someone who isn't worth crying over. So I'm choosing to do something productive instead. The corner of Verelli's mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile, but suggested he understood exactly what she meant. When can you start? Selene blinked. I'm sorry. I'm hiring you. When can you start? I. Her brain stuttered, trying to catch up. Mr. Verelli, I came here to pitch a partnership between your foundation and my firm. I wasn't applying for a position with your company. I'm aware. I'm offering you one anyway. He stood, pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, set it on the table in front of her. Director of Strategic Development. You'll report directly to me. Your job is to secure the funding we need to scale this operation and make sure we don't waste it on bureaucratic nonsense once we have it. Salary is negotiable, but I promise it's more than you're making now. Benefits include health insurance I actually believe in, because I own the damn company writing the policies. Boss. Selene stared at the card like it might explode. I have a job, she said weakly. You have a job that doesn't value you properly, or you wouldn't be here pitching to me. You'd be running your own division. Verelli moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Take the weekend. Think about it. But understand something, Ms. Ward. I don't hire people because they're qualified. I hire people because they're hungry. And you walked in here with the kind of hunger that can't be faked. He left before she could respond. Selene sat alone in the empty conference room, staring at a business card with embossed lettering and trying to process what had just happened. She'd come here expecting to pitch a contract and leave with maybe a handshake and a promise to follow up. Instead, she'd confessed her worst morning to a near stranger and somehow walked away with a job offer that could change everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Text from Marcus. Where are you? We need to talk. Selene looked at the message for exactly 3 seconds, then blocked his number. Then she picked up Virelli's business card and walked out into the rest of her life. Batsong. The weekend passed in a blur of panic and planning. Saturday morning, Selene woke up to 17 missed calls. 9 from Marcus, 6 from her mother, 2 from Lauren. She ignored all of them and went for a run instead, pounding through Central Park until her lungs burned and her legs ached, and she couldn't think about anything except the rhythm of her feet hitting pavement. When she got home, she made a list. Pros of taking Virelli's offer: better salary, actual meaningful work, the chance to build something that mattered instead of just brokering deals for people who already had more money than they needed. No more pretending Marcus's career was somehow more important than hers. No more watching him take credit for her ideas in meetings while she smiled and stayed quiet because making waves wasn't how you got promoted. Cons of taking Virelli's offer: she'd be walking away from 7 years at her current firm, burning bridges with colleagues who'd become friends, starting over in an industry she understood but had never operated in directly, working for a man whose reputation suggested he ate people like her for breakfast. By Sunday afternoon, she'd added a third column. What are you really afraid of? The answer, when she finally wrote it down, was simpler than she wanted it to be: being disposable again. She stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and drafted a resignation letter. Shake it. Monday morning, Selene walked into her firm's downtown office at 7:30 sharp, resignation letter in her bag and Virelli's business card in her pocket like a talisman. Her boss, Richard Stanton, sat in his corner office reviewing quarterly reports with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely believed numbers could solve any problem. He looked up when she knocked, smiled the careful smile he reserved for employees he was still evaluating for partnership potential. Selene, come in. How was your weekend? Productive. She closed the door behind her, sat down without waiting for an invitation. I need to talk to you about the Verelli meeting. Ah, yes. How did that go? Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. I have to admit, I was surprised when you insisted on taking that pitch. Verelli has a reputation for being difficult. The meeting went well. Selene pulled the resignation letter from her bag, set it on his desk. So well that he offered me a position. I'm accepting. Richard's smile froze. He picked up the letter, scanned it quickly, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're resigning. Effective 2 weeks from today, yes. May I ask why? Because you've been promising me a promotion for 18 months, while giving the actual positions to men half as qualified. Because I'm tired of being the only one who works weekends while everyone else golfs. Because Marcus told everyone I slept my way into the Virelli pitch, and you didn't correct him. I think it's time for me to try something different, Selene said instead. Richard set the letter down carefully. I hope you understand this will damage your reputation in the industry. Walking away from a secure position to work for someone like Verelli, people will talk. Let them. He's unstable, Selene. Brilliant, yes, but unstable. There are rumors about his family, his business practices. I'm not interested in rumors. I'm interested in doing work that matters. And you don't think the work you do here matters? Richard's tone sharpened. We've invested 7 years in your development, mentored you, given you opportunities. You've given me projects, Selene interrupted quietly. There's a difference. She stood. I appreciate everything I've learned here, Richard. I do. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my career being grateful for opportunities I earned. She left before he could respond. The rest of the morning passed in a strange fog. Colleagues stopped by her desk, offering congratulations that felt more like condolences. Her assistant asked 3 times if she was sure about this decision. Marcus called from a blocked number. She let it go to voicemail. At noon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered without thinking. Ms. Ward? Verelli's voice, unmistakable even over the phone. I heard you quit your job this morning. Selene's pulse jumped. Word travels fast. I make it a point to know things. A pause. Did you do it because of my offer? I did it because I was ready to leave anyway. Your offer just gave me a reason to pull the trigger. She moved to the window, looked out at the street below. How did you know? Your former boss called me 20 minutes ago to inform me that I'd stolen his best strategist. Something that might have been amusement colored his tone. I told him I'd simply recognized what he was too blind to value properly. Despite everything, Selene smiled. What did he say to that? Nothing printable. Verelli paused. Can you start Wednesday? I gave 2 weeks' notice. I'll pay out your notice period. I need you here now. Selene's heart hammered. That's aggressive. I don't do anything halfway, Ms. Ward. You'll learn that quickly. Another pause, longer this time. There's a gala Thursday night. Major donors, healthcare industry leaders, press. I need someone there who can work a room without making me want to leave early. You want me to attend a gala 3 days after I start working for you? I want you to attend a gala as my Director of Strategic Development, yes. Unless you have a problem with that. Selene thought about Marcus, who'd always hated these events, who'd spent every charity dinner checking his phone and complaining about the food, thought about standing in corners making small talk while he networked with people he deemed important enough to deserve his attention. I don't have a problem with it, she said, but I should warn you, I'm very good at working a room. You might end up being the one who wants to leave early. For the first time since she'd met him, Damian Virelli actually laughed. Wednesday, Ms. Ward, 8 a.m. Don't be late. He hung up before she could respond. Selene stood there holding her phone, looking out at the city and trying to process the fact that her entire life had just reorganized itself in less than 72 hours. She felt untethered and terrified, and more alive than she'd been in years. Her phone buzzed, text from her mother. Your father and I heard about Marcus. Are you all right? She typed back. Better than all right. I'll call you tonight. Then she went back to her desk and started packing. Wednesday morning arrived wrapped in unseasonably cold rain that turned Manhattan streets into rivers of brake lights and frustrated honking. Selene stood outside Virelli's building at 7:45 wearing her best suit and holding an umbrella that kept threatening to turn inside out. The lobby was quieter than she remembered. She signed in at security, got her badge, and took the elevator to the 47th floor with her stomach doing complicated acrobatics. Sophia Reeves met her at reception. Miss Ward, welcome to the team. She extended a hand, her grip was firm and assessing. I'll show you to your office. Office. Singular. Not a cubicle. Reeves led her down a different hallway than the one she'd walked last week, stopped at a door with a frosted glass panel. This is you. Damian wanted you close to his office. You're 3 doors down. Assistant will be here at 9 to help you get oriented. The space was smaller than she'd expected, but perfectly appointed. Desk, chairs, windows overlooking the city. On the desk sat a laptop, company phone, and a single file folder. What's this? Selene picked up the folder. Your first project. Reeves didn't quite smile. Damian wants a full strategic assessment of our current funding pipeline by Friday. Sources, sustainability, risk factors, recommendations for diversification. Think you can manage that in 2 days? Selene opened the folder, scanned the first page, felt her eyebrows climb. This is complicated. That's why he hired you. Reeves moved toward the door. Word of advice, Ms. Ward. Damian doesn't do hand-holding. He'll give you enough rope to either climb or hang yourself. Which one you choose is up to you. She left Selene alone with 2 days' worth of impossible work, and a view of the city that suggested maybe impossible was just another word for interesting. Selene set her bag down, hung up her coat, and got to work. The gala. Thursday night took place in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dendur, which meant Selene spent an hour getting ready while actively trying not to think about the fact that she was about to attend a $5,000 a plate charity dinner with people who probably owned buildings. She'd bought the dress on her lunch break Wednesday. Midnight blue, simple lines, expensive enough to look appropriate, but not so expensive she'd feel guilty about the cost. Hair up, minimal jewelry, lipstick that hopefully communicated professional instead of trying too hard. At 7:15, a car service texted that they were downstairs. At 7:45, Selene walked into the museum and immediately understood she'd underestimated everything. The temple glowed under carefully positioned lights, reflecting off the pool surrounding it like something out of ancient history. People in designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos moved through the space like they'd been born to it, talking, laughing, drinking champagne that probably cost more per glass than Selene used to spend on groceries in a week. She felt her confidence waver. Then she saw Damian Virelli standing near the pool talking to two men in expensive suits, and her breath caught. He wore black. Of course he wore black. Tailored so precisely, it looked like the fabric had been designed specifically for his frame. Dark hair swept back. No tie, just the first two buttons of his shirt undone in a way that somehow managed to look both casual and devastatingly elegant. He looked up, saw her, and his entire expression shifted into something she couldn't quite name. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over. Ms. Ward. His eyes traveled over her face, down to her dress, back up. You look terrified. I'm strategically intimidated, Selene corrected. There's a difference. That almost smile appeared again. Come on, I'll introduce you to people who are much less intimidating than they look. He offered his arm. Selene took it and tried not to notice how solid he felt beneath the expensive fabric. The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and careful conversations. Damian moved through the crowd like water, effortlessly transitioning between discussions about healthcare policy and real estate development and the latest gallery opening at the Whitney. Selene watched him work, cataloging the way he adapted his approach depending on who he was talking to. Warmer with the older donors, sharper with the industry rivals, carefully neutral with the journalists. He introduced her as his director of strategic development without qualification or explanation, and the way he said it made it sound like she'd held the position for years instead of days. You're good at this, she murmured during a brief pause between conversations. At what? Making people believe you're whoever they need you to be. Damian's expression darkened slightly. That's not a compliment. No, Selene agreed, but it's effective. Before he could respond, a woman's voice cut across the space between them. Damian, how lovely to see you. Selene turned and found herself looking at someone who could only be described as devastating. Mid-30s, blonde, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Selene's monthly rent. She moved like someone who'd never questioned her right to exist in any space she entered. Damian's entire posture changed. Not obviously, but Selene had spent enough time reading body language to recognize defensive positioning when she saw it. Celeste, he said, his voice colder than Selene had ever heard it. I didn't realize you'd be here. Marcus Laurent's my +1 tonight. Celeste smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly what landmine she'd just deployed. You remember Marcus, don't you? And that's when Selene saw him. Marcus, her ex-fiancé, walking toward them in a tuxedo she'd helped him pick out last year for her firm's annual dinner. He stopped when he saw her, and the expression on his face cycled through surprise, guilt, and something ugly Selene couldn't quite name. Selene, he said, I didn't know you'd be here. Funny, Selene said, her voice steady despite the fact that her heart was trying to climb out of her chest. I could say the same thing. Celeste looked between them, her smile widening. "Oh," she said sweetly. "Is this awkward? I'm so sorry. Marcus mentioned he'd recently ended a relationship, but I had no idea it was with Damian's new employee." The emphasis on employee made it sound like something bought and paid for. Damian's hand moved to the small of Selene's back, a gesture so subtle she almost didn't notice it, except for the steady pressure anchoring her to the spot. "Ms. Ward is my director of strategic development," he said quietly, "and she's more competent in her first week than most people I've worked with in their entire careers." His eyes locked onto Celeste's. "Marcus, on the other hand, is a mid-level analyst with delusions of importance, which I suppose makes him perfect for you." The temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. "Damian," Celeste said, her smile frozen in place, "still as charming as ever. Only to people who deserve it." He turned to Selene. "We're done here. Come on." He guided her away before either Marcus or Celeste could respond, his hand still pressed against her back, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. They made it to a quieter corner before Selene's knees started shaking. "I need a minute," she said. "Take two." Damian flagged down a server, procured 2 glasses of champagne, handed her one. "That's Celeste Laurent, my ex-wife." Selene almost dropped her glass. "Your ex-wife is dating my ex-fiancé?" "Apparently." Damian's jaw was tight. "Though knowing Celeste, she's not dating him. She's weaponizing him." "Against who?" "Me. You. Anyone she thinks might be in her way." He took a long drink. "We divorced 2 years ago. She walked away with $30 million and a promise that I'd never speak publicly about why our marriage ended. She's spent the time since trying to destroy every relationship I've attempted to build." Selene looked back across the room to where Celeste stood with Marcus, both of them watching with expressions that made her skin crawl. "Why?" she asked. Damian didn't answer for a long moment. "Because I chose to build a foundation instead of an empire," he said finally. "Because I stopped being the man she married." His eyes were very dark. "And because she's never forgiven me for it." Selene thought about Marcus and Lauren tangled in hotel sheets, thought about 3 years of building a life with someone who'd throw it away for convenience. "They're perfect for each other," she said. Damian looked at her, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "Yes," he agreed. "They are." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Selene didn't have words for. Then Damian set down his glass and held out his hand. "Dance with me." "What?" "You heard me. Dance with me." Selene looked at his offered hand like it might burn her. "Why?" "Because they're watching. Because I'm tired of letting her control every room I walk into. Because you look like you need a reason to keep standing." His expression softened slightly. "Pick whichever one works for you." Selene took his hand. He led her to the small dance floor near the temple, where a string quartet played something slow and complicated. Other couples moved in careful circles. Damian pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and suddenly Selene was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. "I don't really know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." They moved in slow rotations, not quite in time with the music, but close enough that it didn't matter. Selene could feel eyes on them, could practically hear the whispers starting about Damian Virelli and his new director and the ex-wife watching from across the room. "This is a terrible idea," she said quietly. "Probably." Damian's thumb traced small circles against her waist through the fabric of her dress. "Do you want to stop?" Selene thought about it, about Marcus and his betrayal, about Celeste and her calculated cruelty, about the fact that her entire life had reorganized itself in less than a week, and she still couldn't tell if she was running toward something or away from everything she'd known. "No," she said. "I don't want to stop." Damian's eyes held hers, and across the room, watching them dance in the shadow of an ancient temple, Celeste Laurent smiled like a predator who'd just spotted prey. The dance ended, but the damage was already done. Selene felt it in the way conversations shifted when she and Damian walked past. Voices dropping to whispers, eyes tracking their movement like they were something dangerous that needed monitoring. By the time they made it back to the bar, her phone had 3 new text messages from colleagues at her old firm asking if the rumors were true, if she was really working for Verelli now, if she knew what people were saying. She deleted them without reading past the first lines. "You're not going to like tomorrow's headlines," Damian said quietly, handing her another glass of champagne she hadn't asked for, but definitely needed. "What will they say? That I hired you because you're sleeping with me, that you left your fiancé for someone with more money, that we're both reckless and unprofessional." He took a drink, his expression carved from stone. "Celeste will make sure of it. She has half the society columnists in the city on speed dial." Celine's stomach turned. "Can we stop it?" "No. We can only decide how we respond." He looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she had. "Which means you need to decide right now if you're in this or not." "In what?" "Whatever this becomes." He gestured between them. "Because it's going to get worse before it gets better. Celeste doesn't play small. She'll come after your reputation, your family, anyone connected to you. She'll manufacture scandals and leak private information and turn every good thing we try to build into ammunition against us." His jaw tightened. "I won't blame you if you want to walk away now. You signed up to develop strategy, not to become collateral damage in someone else's war." Selene thought about her mother's upcoming text messages, about what her father would say when he saw the photos that were probably already circulating online, about the colleagues who'd spent 7 years watching her climb and would spend the next 7 watching her burn if she gave them the chance. Then she thought about Marcus tangled in hotel sheets with Lauren, about 3 years of making herself smaller so he could feel bigger, about every time she'd swallowed her ambition because ambitious women were threatening and threatening women didn't get engagement rings. "I'm not walking away," she said. Damian studied her face. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. He set down his glass and straightened his jacket with the kind of precise movement that suggested he was preparing for battle. "Then we work," he said. "We build the foundation exactly as planned. We ignore every headline and every whisper and every piece of garbage Celeste throws at us, and we do the work we came here to do." He paused. "And when she inevitably escalates, we don't flinch." "What happens when she escalates?" "I handle it." The way he said it, flat and final, made Selene think of 16-year-old boys watching their fathers break bones in kitchens. Made her wonder exactly what handling it meant to someone who'd grown up in a world where violence was currency. "Damian, trust me, Selene." He said her first name for the first time, and hearing it in his voice did something complicated to her chest. "I won't let her destroy you." Before Selene could respond, Celeste's voice cut across the space between them like a blade. "How sweet, already making promises you can't keep." She'd appeared beside them without warning, Marcus trailing a step behind, looking uncomfortable in a way that would have been satisfying if Selene wasn't too angry to enjoy it. Damian's entire body went rigid. "Walk away, Celeste." "It's a public event, darling. I'm allowed to mingle." Celeste's smile was poison wrapped in designer lipstick. "Besides, I wanted to congratulate Ms. Ward on her new position. It's not every day someone manages to fuck their way into executive leadership quite so quickly." The insult landed like a physical blow. Selene felt her face flush hot, felt every carefully constructed professional instinct scream at her to stay calm, to not react, to be the bigger person. She ignored all of it. "Is that how you got your divorce settlement?" she asked pleasantly. "Or did Damian just pay you to leave because living with you wasn't worth $30 million? Celeste's smile froze. Marcus actually took a step back. Damian made a sound that might have been a laugh or a warning. Selene couldn't tell which and didn't particularly care. "Careful, Ms. Ward," Celeste said, her voice dropping 10 degrees. "You have no idea what kind of game you're playing." "Neither do you." Selene stepped forward, closing the distance between them until they were nearly nose to nose. She was shorter than Celeste by 3 inches, but fury made up the difference. "Because if you did, you'd know that I don't respond well to threats. And I sure as hell don't respond well to people who mistake cruelty for power." For just a second, genuine surprise flickered across Celeste's face. Then it vanished behind that perfect mask of contempt. "Damian, your new pet has teeth. How amusing." "Selene." Damian's hand found her elbow, gentle but firm. "We're leaving." "But I was just getting started." "Now." The command in his voice cut through her anger enough to make her reconsider. She let him guide her toward the exit, acutely aware of every eye tracking their departure. every whispered conversation that would become tomorrow's headlines. They made it to the coat check before Celine's hands started shaking. "I shouldn't have said that," she managed. "Yes, you should have." Damian retrieved her coat, held it while she slipped into it. "Someone needed to, and I'm legally prohibited from engaging with her in public venues." "What?" "Restraining order. Mutual. Part of the divorce settlement." He pulled on his own coat, led her toward the museum's grand entrance. "I'm not allowed within 50 feet of her unless it's a professional necessity. She violated it tonight by approaching us. I could have her arrested." "Will you?" "No, that's what she wants. Drama, attention, an excuse to play the victim." They stepped outside into cold November air that tasted like rain and exhaust fumes. "I learned a long time ago that the best way to deal with Celeste is to simply refuse to play her game." Selene watched his profile in the streetlight, trying to reconcile the controlled man beside her with the boy who'd watched his father commit violence in a kitchen, trying to understand what it cost him to choose restraint when every instinct probably screamed for something else. "What did she do?" Selene asked quietly. "To make you hate her this much?" Damian was silent for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "She tried to kill the foundation before it even existed. Found out I was redirecting company profits toward building the first clinic and threatened to expose what she called financial irregularities unless I shut it down. Said it was embarrassing to have a husband playing charity worker when I should have been focused on expanding the empire." His hands flexed at his sides. "When I refused, she went to the board, tried to have me removed as CEO of my own company on grounds of mental instability." Celine's breath caught. "Did it work?" "Almost. I had to spend 18 months proving I wasn't having a breakdown, that the foundation was legally sound, that every dollar I spent was mine to spend. By the time I won, she'd poisoned half my business relationships and turned most of our mutual friends against me." He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw enough to hurt. "That's who you defended me against tonight, someone who won't stop until she's destroyed everything I've tried to build." "Then we don't let her," Selene said. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." She grabbed his arm, made him face her fully. "You want to build something that matters, so do I. And I refuse to let some bitter ex-wife with a vendetta stop us just because she knows how to manipulate tabloid journalists." Damian stared at her like he was seeing someone he hadn't expected to find. "You don't know what you're signing up for," he said. "Neither did you when you hired me." Selene smiled despite everything. "Guess we're both gambling." The car service pulled up before he could respond. They rode back to her apartment in silence that felt less comfortable than it should have, both of them processing what had just happened and what it meant for every day that followed. When they pulled up outside her building, Damian walked her to the door despite her protests. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He stood there in the November cold, looking at her like she was a problem he hadn't figured out how to solve. "Get some sleep, Selene. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "How brutal?" "The kind where you'll wish you'd stayed in bed." He turned to leave, paused. "For what it's worth, you were magnificent tonight." He left before she could ask what he meant. Selene rode the elevator to her fourth-floor apartment in a daze, unlocked her door, and found Lauren sitting on her couch. Her first instinct was violence. Her second was to call the police. Her third, the one she actually followed, was to very calmly set down her purse and ask, "How did you get in here?" Lauren stood, wringing her hands in a gesture that might have seemed apologetic if Selene wasn't furious enough to see straight through it. "You gave me a spare key, remember? When I was watering your plants last summer?" "That wasn't an invitation for permanent access." "I know, I'm sorry. I needed to talk to you, and you blocked my number, and I didn't know how else." "Get out." Lauren flinched. "Selene, please, just give me 5 minutes to explain." "Explain what?" Selene heard her voice rising and didn't care. "Explain how you decided sleeping with my fiancé was somehow acceptable? Explain how you looked me in the eye every single day while you were betraying me? Explain which part of that requires me to give you 5 goddamn minutes of my time." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Lauren? Please, enlighten me." Lauren's eyes filled with tears that Selene absolutely refused to feel sympathy for. "It just happened. We didn't mean for it to happen. We were working late on the Morrison account, and he was upset because you two had been fighting, and I was there, and And you decided the appropriate response was to fuck him in a hotel room 6 blocks from my office. You don't understand. No, I understand perfectly. Selene grabbed Lauren's coat from where it hung over her chair, threw it at her. You're selfish and opportunistic, and you saw something you wanted and took it without caring who it destroyed. That's not complicated. That's just pathetic. Lauren caught the coat, clutching it like armor. He loves me. Then congratulations, you can have him. Selene moved to the door, held it open. Now get the fuck out of my apartment before I have you arrested for trespassing. Selene, out. Lauren left in a rush of tears and excuses that Selene stopped listening to halfway through. She locked the door behind her, threw the deadbolt, and stood there shaking with rage and exhaustion and something that felt like grief but sharper. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Lovely photo of you and Damian at the gala. Front page of tomorrow's post. Congratulations on your upgrade. See. Attached was a photo of Selene and Damian dancing, his hand at her waist, her face turned up toward his. The caption read, Verelli's new conquest. Billionaire mogul moves fast with newly single director. Selene threw her phone across the room hard enough that it cracked against the wall. Then she poured herself 3 fingers of whiskey and tried very hard not to think about how badly the next few weeks were going to hurt. Friday morning arrived with the subtlety of a hand grenade. The New York Post ran the photo on page 3 with a gleefully vicious article speculating about Selene's rapid rise through the ranks, and whether her qualifications included anything beyond catching the eye of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. The Times was slightly more restrained, but still managed to question the optics of Damian hiring someone so recently available. Social media turned it into a game, with people placing bets on how long their relationship would last. Selene walked into the office at 7:30 to find Sophia Reeves waiting by her door. Conference room, now. No greeting, no explanation. Selene followed her down the hall to where Damian sat with Michael Chen and 2 people she didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a younger man taking notes on a tablet. Sit, Damian said, and his voice carried the kind of controlled fury that made Selene's stomach drop. She sat. This is Patricia Hawthorne, our crisis management consultant, Damian gestured to the gray-haired woman, and James Rivera, her associate. They're here to help us navigate the shitstorm Celeste dropped on our heads last night. Patricia looked at Selene with the assessing gaze of someone who'd seen this particular disaster play out 100 times before. Miss Ward, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you and Mr. Virelli involved romantically? No. Have you ever been involved romantically? No. Do you plan to be involved romantically in the future? Selene glanced at Damian, whose expression was completely unreadable. I don't think my future romantic plans are relevant to. Answer the question, please. No, Selene said, more firmly this time. I have no plans to be romantically involved with Mr. Virelli. Patricia made a note on her legal pad. Good. That makes this easier. Here's what we're going to do. Complete radio silence on the personal front. No comments to press. No social media posts. No public appearances together unless absolutely necessary for at least 6 weeks. She looked at Damian. That includes the donor breakfast next Tuesday. Absolutely not. Damian leaned forward. Selene needs to be at that breakfast. She's presenting the funding strategy. Then have someone else present it. There is no one else. She's the only person who knows the material well enough. Then you skip the breakfast. Damian. Patricia's voice went hard. I've been doing this for 23 years. I've handled scandals that would make this look like a playground dispute. And I'm telling you that if you 2 appear in public together again in the next month, the narrative shifts from unfortunate optics to confirmed affair, and once that happens, we lose complete control of the story. Silence settled over the room like frost. Selene felt something cold sliding down her spine. So what are you suggesting? That I just hide in my office for 6 weeks while everyone assumes I slept my way into this job? I'm suggesting you do your work quietly and professionally while we redirect the conversation toward the Foundation's actual mission. Patricia turned to her. The more you protest, the more guilty you look. The more you hide, the more suspicious it seems. So you find the middle ground. You show up, you work, you don't comment, and you certainly don't give them any more ammunition. And what about Celeste? Damian's voice was ice. She's not going to stop with one photo. No, she's not. which is why we're going to beat her at her own game. Patricia pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. I've been doing some research into Ms. Laurent's activities over the past 2 years. Turns out she's been running a rather sophisticated investment scheme through a series of shell companies tied to her charitable foundation. Damian opened the folder, scanned the first page, and his expression went very still. Is this verified? Enough to bring to the SEC, yes. The question is whether you want to. The room held its breath. Selene watched emotions flicker across Damian's face. Rage, calculation, something that looked almost like pain. She thought about what he'd told her outside the museum, about choosing restraint, about refusing to play Celeste's game. We don't use it, he said finally. Patricia's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? We don't use it. That's exactly what she wants, for me to attack her publicly so she can play the victim and turn this into a war. He closed the folder, pushed it back across the table. Find another way. Damian, this could end the problem permanently. I said no. His voice cracked like a whip. I didn't build this company by destroying people, and I'm not starting now. Patricia and Chen exchanged a look that suggested they thought their boss had lost his mind. Selene understood perfectly. Then what do we do? Reeves asked. We work. Damian stood, signaling the meeting was over. We execute the strategy exactly as planned. We let the Foundation's success speak louder than Celeste's lies. And we trust that eventually the truth is more interesting than the scandal. He left the room before anyone could argue. Selene caught up with him 3 doors down, outside his office. That was stupid, she said. He turned, and for a second she saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Excuse me? You heard me? Patricia just handed you the perfect weapon and you threw it away because you're afraid of becoming your father. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Selene stepped closer, lowering her voice even though they were alone in the hallway. You told me yourself that you spent 15 years building something separate from his world. Something clean. But Damian, clean doesn't mean weak. And choosing not to use that information isn't mercy. It's just letting her hurt more people while you stand there pretending restraint is the same thing as doing the right thing. His jaw tightened. So what are you suggesting? That I destroy her? I'm suggesting you protect the people who depend on this foundation. The patients, the families, the staff who've dedicated themselves to this mission. Selene held his gaze. Celeste isn't going to stop with tabloid photos. You know that. She's going to escalate until she either destroys us or we destroy her. And if we go down, so does everything we're trying to build. There has to be another way. That's your bull. There isn't. Not with someone like her. Selene's voice softened slightly. I'm not saying you have to become your father. I'm saying you have to be smart enough to recognize when mercy is just another word for suicide. Damian stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something internal that she didn't have access to. I need to think, he said finally. Then think fast. Because while you're deciding whether to be noble, she's planning her next attack. Selene left him standing there and went back to her office, where the funding assessment waited with its impossible deadline and its complicated spreadsheets. She worked through lunch, worked through dinner, worked until her eyes burned and her shoulders ached, and the numbers started blurring together into meaningless columns. At 9:30, someone knocked on her door. Come in, she said without looking up. Damian entered carrying 2 containers of Chinese food and looking exhausted in a way that made him seem younger than 36. You need to eat, he said, setting one container on her desk. I need to finish this assessment. You need to eat first. He opened his own container, sat in the chair across from her desk. Come on, take a break. Selene wanted to argue, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that made Damian smile slightly. She ate. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sound chopsticks against cardboard and the distant hum of building ventilation. I called Patricia back, Damian said finally. Told her to prepare the SEC documentation. Selene's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. You're going after Celeste? I'm protecting the foundation. There's a difference. He set down his food, met her eyes. You were right. Mercy doesn't mean letting her destroy everything we're building, but I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing it because she's committed actual crimes and needs to be held accountable for them. Damian, I need you to understand something. He leaned forward, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Celeste will retaliate. She'll come after both of us with everything she has, and I need to know you're prepared for that. Selene thought about Lauren sitting on her couch making excuses, about Marcus and his betrayal, about the tabloid photos and the whispered conversations, and the colleagues who'd probably already written her off as another woman who'd compromised her integrity for a man with money. I'm prepared, she said. Are you sure? Because once we start this, there's no going back. We cross a line that... Damian. She reached across the desk, caught his hand before she could overthink it. I'm sure. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. His fingers curled around hers, warm and solid and reassuring in a way that made her chest ache. Together, he agreed quietly. They finished eating without letting go of each other's hands, and neither of them mentioned how natural it felt or what it might mean for all the denials they'd given Patricia that morning. The weekend passed in tense preparation. Patricia's team worked around the clock compiling evidence. Chen reviewed financials. Reeves drafted press statements for every possible outcome. Selene spent Saturday morning at her parents' house in Westchester, enduring her mother's worried questions and her father's careful silence. I just want to make sure you know what you're doing, her mother said over coffee in the kitchen, where Selene had grown up. This man has a reputation. So do I, apparently. Selene traced the rim of her mug. According to the Post, I'm a gold digger who traded up from Marcus to someone with a bigger bank account. Her mother flinched. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Selene looked up, meeting her eyes. You want to know if I'm sleeping with him? Everyone does. And the answer is no. But it doesn't matter because people have already decided what they think, and nothing I say is going to change that. Then why stay? Her father asked from the doorway. If this job is causing you this much trouble, because the work matters, Dad. Because for the first time in my career, I'm building something that might actually help people instead of just making rich investors richer. She stood, suddenly desperate for air. I know you're worried. I know this looks messy, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Her parents exchanged one of those long married looks that communicated entire conversations without words. We trust you, her mother said finally. We just don't trust him. You don't know him. Neither do you, sweetheart. Not really. You've worked for him for less than 2 weeks. Selene thought about Damian's hand at her waist during the gala, about the way he'd looked at her when she defended him against Celeste, about sitting in her office at 9:30 at night eating Chinese food while they planned to dismantle his ex-wife's life. You're right, she admitted. I don't know him, but I'm going to. She left before they could ask what she meant by that. Monday morning, the SEC announcement hit like a tactical nuke. Patricia timed it perfectly, 7 a.m., before markets opened, with a prepared statement from the Securities and Exchange Commission announcing an investigation into Celeste Laurent's charitable foundation for suspected securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. By 8 a.m., Celeste's face was on every financial news channel. By 9, her lawyers had issued a statement denying everything and suggesting the investigation was motivated by personal vendetta from her ex-husband. By 10, Patricia had countered with documentation proving the SEC had been building the case for 6 months independent of any input from Damian. By noon, Celeste showed up at Damian's building. Selene was in a meeting with Chen going over quarterly projections when Reeves burst through the door. We have a situation. They found Celeste in the lobby screaming at security while a crowd of employees gathered to watch. Going to destroy you, she was saying, her perfect composure finally shattered into something ugly and desperate. You think you can manipulate federal investigators? You think you can ruin my life and walk away clean? Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, one of the security guards said. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Damian. He's not here, Reeves lied smoothly. And you need to leave before we call the police. Celeste's wild gaze swept the lobby and landed on Selene standing near the elevators. You, she hissed. Selene's stomach dropped. This is your fault. You and your pathetic little seduction routine. Celeste started toward her, but security stepped between them. He was fine before you showed up. Weak and manageable and mine. And then you came along playing the victim, and he just had to save you. Celeste. Damian's voice cut through the chaos like broken glass. He stood at the elevator bank, and Selene had never seen him look more dangerous. Everything controlled and elegant about him had burned away, leaving something cold and absolutely terrifying in its place. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Now. Or what? You'll have me arrested?" Celeste laughed, and it sounded like something breaking. "Go ahead, add it to the list. Restraining order violation, trespassing, whatever else you want to invent. It won't change the truth." "Which is?" "That you're destroying me because I stopped you from wasting your life on some pointless charity project. That you can't stand the fact that I saw through your self-righteous bullshit and called you on it." She took a step toward him, and security moved with her. "You want to play savior, Damian? Fine. But don't pretend this is about justice. This is about you punishing me for not worshiping at the altar of your guilt." Damian's expression didn't change. "Security, escort Miss Laurent from the building. If she returns, call the police immediately. You can't just—" "I can and I did. Get her out of here." They half-dragged, half-walked Celeste toward the doors while she screamed threats and accusations that echoed off marble walls. Employees whispered. Phones appeared, recording everything. Damian watched until she was gone, then turned to the gathered crowd. "Show's over. Back to work." People scattered. Selene started towards him, but Reeves grabbed her arm. "Give him a minute," she said quietly. They watched Damian walk to the far corner of the lobby, pull out his phone, make a call that lasted less than 30 seconds. When he returned, his mask was back in place, controlled, elegant, completely unreadable. "Conference room," he said. "We need damage control." The meeting lasted 3 hours. Patricia crafted responses. Legal reviewed options. Chen calculated financial impact if donors pulled funding over the scandal. Through it all, Damian sat at the head of the table, radiating controlled fury that made everyone nervous except Selene, who understood exactly what it cost him to maintain that control. When everyone finally left, she stayed. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Define okay." "Honest answer, Damian." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I just publicly destroyed someone I used to love. So no, Selene, I'm not okay." She moved around the table, sat in the chair beside him instead of across from him. "You didn't destroy her. You held her accountable for actual crimes. The result is the same." "No, it's not. Intent matters. Motivation matters." She caught his hand, made him look at her. "You could have done this 2 years ago. You could have buried her during the divorce, but you didn't. You waited until she forced your hand by threatening everything you've built. That's not destruction, Damian. That's self-defense." His thumb traced circles against her palm, and she realized they'd been holding hands a lot lately for two people who swore they weren't involved. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing the difference." Before Selene could respond, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello?" "Selene Ward?" A woman's voice, professionally pleasant. "This is Detective Sarah Chen with the NYPD. I need you to come down to the precinct to answer some questions regarding Marcus Laurent and allegations of harassment." Celine's blood ran cold. "What?" "Mr. Laurent filed a complaint this morning claiming you've been stalking him, making threatening phone calls, and showing up at his residence uninvited. We need your statement." "That's insane. I haven't contacted him since—" "Ma'am, I understand this is upsetting, but I still need you to come in. Can you be here within the hour?" Selene looked at Damian, whose expression had gone absolutely murderous. "I'll be there," she said. "With my lawyer." She hung up. "Celeste put Marcus up to filing false police reports," Damian said flatly. "Looks like it. I'm coming with you." "Damian, non-negotiable." He was already standing, already pulling on his jacket. "You're not facing this alone." Selene should have argued, should have maintained some professional distance, should have remembered all the reasons why letting Damian Virelli protect her was a terrible idea that would only feed the rumors. Instead, she said, "Okay." They walked out together into November afternoon light that felt like the calm before something catastrophic, and Selene wondered if this was what the point of no return felt like, standing beside someone dangerous while the world burned around you, knowing you'd made your choice and there was no going back. The police station smelled like stale coffee and bureaucratic despair. Selene sat in an interview room across from Detective Chen, no relation to Michael, apparently, while Damian waited outside with the lawyer he'd called on the drive over. So you're claiming you never contacted Mr. Laurent after your breakup? Detective Chen asked, pen poised over her notepad. I blocked his number the day I found out he was cheating on me. I haven't spoken to him since. He says you've been calling from blocked numbers, leaving threatening messages. Then he's lying. He provided recordings, Ms. Ward. Celine's stomach dropped. What? Detective Chen pulled out her phone, played an audio file. A woman's voice, not Celine's, but close enough to be deliberately misleading, saying, "You're going to regret what you did. You and that bitch you're fucking. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are." That's not me, Selene said. It sounds like you. It's not me. Someone manufactured that recording. Do you have proof? Do you? Selene leaned forward. Because I'm guessing if you run that audio through any decent analysis software, you'll find evidence of editing. And I'm also guessing Marcus can't actually prove those calls came from my phone because they didn't. Detective Chen studied her. You seem very certain. I am certain, because I didn't make those calls. Someone is setting me up, and if you're worth anything as a detective, you'll figure out who. She paused. Have you looked into Celeste Laurent's activities today? Ms. Laurent's SEC investigation is not relevant to, It's absolutely relevant. She's Damian Virelli's ex-wife. Marcus is her current boyfriend. I work for Damian. We just triggered a federal investigation into her finances. And now suddenly Marcus is filing harassment complaints with manufactured evidence? Selene shook her head. Come on, detective. You're smarter than this. Chen's expression flickered with something that might have been acknowledgement. I'll look into it, she said finally. But in the meantime, I need you to avoid any contact with Mr. Laurent. No calls, no messages, no showing up at locations where he might be. That won't be a problem, Selene said. I have better things to do than waste time on men who can't be bothered to cheat competently. She left the interview room to find Damian pacing the hallway like a caged animal. Well? Celeste manufactured evidence, fake phone calls with someone who sounds like me making threats. Selene rubbed her temples. The detective is looking into it, but in the meantime, I'm supposed to avoid Marcus. Son of a bitch, Damian's hands curled into fists. This is exactly what she does. Create chaos, manipulate the system, make herself untouchable, while everyone else burns. Damian, I should have destroyed her years ago. Should have used every piece of dirt I had on her and buried her so deep she could never surface. But I tried to be honorable, tried to take the high road, and this is what it gets me. You getting dragged into police stations over manufactured bullshit. Hey. Selene grabbed his arm, made him stop pacing. Look at me. He did, and the pain in his eyes was raw enough to hurt. This isn't your fault, she said. Celeste made her choices. Marcus made his. We're just the people refusing to let them win. You shouldn't have to fight this battle. Neither should you, but here we are. She squeezed his arm. So we fight it together, just like we said. Damian pulled her into a hug so sudden and fierce it drove the breath from her lungs. She stood there wrapped in expensive wool and the scent of his cologne, feeling his heart hammering against her cheek, and understood that they'd crossed some invisible line they couldn't uncross. I won't let her hurt you, he said against her hair. Whatever it takes. And standing there in the police station hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the weight of Damian Virelli's promise settling into her bones, Selene realized she believed him, which was either the smartest thing she'd ever done or the most catastrophically stupid, and she had no idea which. Mbopat. They returned to the office to find chaos. 3 major donors had pulled their funding, citing concerns about organizational leadership and stability. 2 board members had called emergency meetings. The press had gotten wind of Selene's police station visit and were now running stories speculating about escalating drama and toxic workplace culture. Chen met them at the elevator looking grim. We need to make a statement, he said. Now, before this spirals further. What kind of statement? Damian asked. The kind that demonstrates stability and control. That shows donors we're not letting personal drama derail the Foundation's mission. They gathered in the conference room. Damian, Selene, Chen, Reeves, Patricia, and 3 board members who'd flown in specifically to demand answers. Robert Morrison, the board chair, spoke first. I'm going to be blunt, Damian. This situation is untenable. We have a foundation trying to do serious work while you're engaged in what appears to be a very public, very messy personal conflict with your ex-wife. And now we have questions about your new director's judgment and stability. Celine's judgment is not in question, Damian interrupted. She was at a police station this afternoon. Ooh. Being questioned about false allegations manufactured by Celeste is retaliation for the SEC investigation. The detective is already looking into evidence tampering. Morrison exchanged glances with the other board members. Even so, the optics are terrible. We're hemorrhaging donors. Staff morale is suffering. And frankly, Damian, your decision to hire someone you're romantically involved with raises serious concerns about, I'm not romantically involved with Selene. The photos from the gala suggest otherwise. The photos show us dancing at a professional event. Damian's voice dropped to something dangerous. If you're suggesting that hiring a woman automatically implies romantic involvement, then we have much bigger problems with this board's attitudes than I thought. The room went very quiet. Selene sat there feeling like she was watching a train wreck in slow motion, knowing she should speak up, but having no idea what to say that wouldn't make things worse. Morrison cleared his throat. Nevertheless, we need to consider implementing some distance between you and Ms. Ward. Perhaps having her report to someone else, or restructuring her role to... No. Damian. I said no. He stood, and everyone else automatically straightened. Selene Ward is the most qualified person I've ever worked with. She's brilliant, dedicated, and capable of executing strategy that will transform this foundation into something genuinely revolutionary. And I'm not going to sideline her because my ex-wife is throwing a tantrum and some donors can't handle a little controversy. This isn't a little controversy, Morrison said. This is a full-scale crisis. Then we manage the crisis without sacrificing good people to bad optics. Damian looked at each board member in turn. I understand you're concerned. I understand this looks messy, but I'm asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing and to give us time to prove that the work matters more than the scandal. And if the scandal continues to grow, then we'll handle it, together, as a team committed to our actual mission instead of running scared every time someone tries to tear us down. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You have 6 weeks. If the situation hasn't stabilized by then, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about leadership structure. It wasn't an agreement. It was an ultimatum. Damian nodded once. Understood. The board members left. Selene sat there feeling like she'd just watched Damian put his entire career on the line for her, and having absolutely no idea how to process that. You shouldn't have done that, she said quietly once they were alone. Done what? Defended me. Risked your relationship with the board. This foundation is everything to you. So are you. 3 words. Dropped into silence like stones into still water. Selene's breath caught. Damian? I'm not saying this to make things complicated. I'm saying it because it's true. He moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. You walked into my office 2 weeks ago looking like your world had ended. And somehow in that moment I knew that letting you leave would be one of the biggest mistakes of my life. So I hired you. And every day since, you've proven that instinct right. That doesn't mean you should risk everything for me. You're not hearing me. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her chest ache. I'm not risking everything for you. I'm choosing to build something with you that's worth more than playing it safe. There's a difference. Selene stood on shaking legs, moved to where he stood. This is a terrible idea, she said. Probably. People are already talking. This will just make it worse. Let them talk. We could lose everything. The funding, the donors, the foundation itself. Selene. He caught her face in both hands, gentle, despite the roughness in his voice. I spent 15 years building an empire I didn't care about to prove I was different from my father. And I was miserable the entire time. Then my mother died because the system failed her, and I realized I'd been building the wrong thing. So I started over, built this foundation, started actually helping people. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. And then you walked in and made me remember that caring about the work isn't enough. You have to care about the people you're doing it with, and I care about you. More than is probably smart, more than is definitely professional. But I'm done pretending I don't. Selene's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. If we do this, she said, there's no going back. We cross a line that changes everything. I know. The board will probably fire us both. Probably. Celeste will escalate. Marcus will too. It's going to get so much worse before it gets better. I know that too. Damian smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him. No calculation, no control, just genuine warmth. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. So I'm asking, do you want this? Want us? Despite everything it might cost? Selene thought about all the reasons she should say no. About professionalism and optics and the 6-week deadline Morrison had just imposed. About Celeste and Marcus and every tabloid that would rip them apart. Then she thought about Damian's hand at her waist while they danced. About Chinese food at 9:30 in the police station hallway with his arms around her. About the way he looked at her like she was someone worth defending. Yes, she heard herself say. I want this. Damian kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative or any of the things first kisses were supposed to be in romantic stories. It was fierce and desperate and tasted like relief. Like two people who'd been holding themselves together finally letting go. Selene grabbed his jacket, pulled him closer, let herself fall into the kind of kiss that rewrote entire futures. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damian pressed his forehead to hers. You're sure? He asked. Absolutely not, but I'm doing it anyway. He laughed, and the sound was so genuinely joyful, it made her chest hurt. They stood there wrapped around each other while Manhattan glittered below them, and neither of them mentioned that they'd just committed to a relationship that would probably destroy them both. Outside in the hallway, someone's phone buzzed with a news alert. Inside Damian's office, the future began rewriting itself into something neither of them had planned, but both were choosing anyway. And 3 miles away in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Celeste Laurent smiled as she made a phone call that would change everything. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Selene woke to her phone vibrating against the nightstand, Damian's arm heavy across her waist, his breathing steady in the darkness of her bedroom. They'd left the office at midnight, come back to her apartment because it was closer, fallen into bed together with the kind of desperate urgency that came from finally stopping fighting against something inevitable. Now her phone was screaming, and Damian was stirring beside her, and every instinct Selene had told her that nothing good ever came from calls at 2 a.m. She grabbed the phone. Unknown number. Hello? Ms. Ward, this is Officer Janet Rodriguez with the 19th Precinct. We need you to come identify your brother at Lenox Hill Hospital. Selene's blood turned to ice. What happened? There was an incident. He's stable, but we need family present. How soon can you get here? 20 minutes. She hung up, already throwing off covers, reaching for clothes. What's wrong? Damian's voice, rough with sleep. My brother. Hospital. I don't know what happened. Her hands shook trying to button her jeans. I have to go. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. Selene. He was already out of bed, already pulling on his pants. I'm coming with you. They made it to Lenox Hill in 15 minutes. Damian driving through empty streets like he was personally offended by traffic laws. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Officer Rodriguez met them near the intake desk. Your brother is Daniel Ward, correct? Yes. What happened? He was found unconscious in an alley off Amsterdam Avenue around midnight. Witnesses reported seeing him leave a bar with a woman, then approximately 30 minutes later, someone called 911 about a possible overdose. Selene's stomach dropped. Overdose? Danny doesn't use drugs. The talk screen says otherwise. We found fentanyl, cocaine, and rohypnol in his system, levels consistent with someone who was dosed without their knowledge. Someone drugged him? That's what we're investigating. The woman he left with hasn't been identified yet. We're reviewing security footage from the bar. Rodriguez paused. Ms. Ward, your brother is very lucky. If that 911 call had come 10 minutes later, we'd be having a very different conversation. Damian's hand found the small of Selene's back, steady and grounding. Can I see him? She asked. Room 347. The doctor wants to keep him overnight for observation. They found Danny in a hospital bed, looking small and pale, and 22 years old instead of the confident law student who'd called her last week to brag about acing his contracts exam. An IV drip fed into his arm. Monitors beeped steady rhythms. His eyes opened when she walked in. Selene, his voice came out cracked and hoarse. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I was just having a drink and then everything went black and... Shh. It's okay. You're safe now. She grabbed his hand, held on tight. Do you remember anything about the woman you left with? Danny's forehead creased. Blonde. Pretty. She said... He stopped, looked confused. She said she knew you. Said you'd sent her to talk to me about something important. Ice slid down Celine's spine. What did she look like? I don't know, everything's fuzzy. But she knew your name, knew where you worked, knew about... He stopped again, this time looking at Damian with recognition filtering through the drug haze. You're Damian Virelli. I am. She knew about you too, said Selene was in some kind of trouble and she needed my help. Danny's grip on Celine's hand tightened. I'm so stupid. I should have called you first, should have verified, but she seemed so genuine and I was worried and... This isn't your fault, Selene said, but her mind was already racing ahead to the only person who would know enough to manufacture this specific trap. Damian pulled out his phone, made a call. Patricia, I need you to get in touch with Officer Rodriguez at the 19th Precinct immediately. We have evidence Celeste Laurent orchestrated an assault on Selene Ward's brother. Yes, I'm sure. Call me back when you have something. He hung up and met Celine's eyes. She's escalating faster than we anticipated, he said quietly. She tried to kill my brother. We don't know that for certain. Don't. Celine's voice came out colder than she'd ever heard it. Don't tell me this was just meant to scare him. He had enough fentanyl in his system to stop his heart. If that 911 call had come 5 minutes later, Danny would be dead. So don't stand there and tell me Celeste wasn't trying to kill him. Damian's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Danny drifted back to sleep, the drug still working through his system. Selene sat beside his bed holding his hand while Damian made calls in the hallway, his voice carrying through the door in controlled fury that promised someone was about to have a very bad day. Rodriguez returned around 4 a.m. with security footage from the bar. The woman who'd approached Danny was blonde, mid-30s, wearing designer clothes and a smile that looked friendly right up until you saw her eyes. She'd bought him 2 drinks, laughed at his jokes, touched his arm in that casual way that suggested interest without being overtly sexual. Then she'd walked him out the back door and disappeared. We're running facial recognition, Rodriguez said. But if she's professional, she probably used a fake ID and paid cash. Makes it harder to track. Track Celeste Laurent's recent financial transactions, Damian said. Look for any large cash withdrawals in the past 72 hours. Cross-reference with known associates who might be willing to do this kind of work. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. You have experience with this kind of investigation, Mr. Verelli? My father was very good at making people disappear when they became inconvenient. I learned how to find them again. His expression was granite. Trust me when I say I know exactly how someone like Celeste operates. Rodriguez studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can find. She left. Selene sat there watching her brother sleep and feeling rage build in her chest like pressure in a closed system with nowhere to go. I want to destroy her, she said quietly. Damian moved to stand beside her chair. We will. Not through the SEC, not through legal channels that take months while she keeps attacking. Selene looked up at him. I want her gone, completely. However that needs to happen. Something shifted in Damian's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding that Selene had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. That's a dangerous road, he said. I don't care. You should. Because once you start down it, there's no coming back. I know. I've been there. He crouched beside her chair, took her free hand. My father built his empire on making people disappear, and it destroyed him from the inside until the only thing left was violence and paranoia. I won't let that happen to you. Then what do you suggest? Selene's voice cracked. We wait for her next attack? Wait to see which family member she targets next? My mother? My father? You? We're smarter than she is. We use that. Being smart didn't stop her from nearly killing my brother. Damian didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, broken only by monitor beeps and Danny's steady breathing, both of them processing what it meant that Celeste had moved from manipulating headlines to actual violence. Selene's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Your brother looked so peaceful in that alley. Almost angelic. Next time I won't call 911. See, she showed the message to Damian. His expression went absolutely murderous. That's a direct threat, he said. We can take this to the police. And what will they do? Give her another restraining order she'll ignore? Fine her money she has an unlimited supply? Selene deleted the message, felt something cold settling into her bones. No, if we're going to stop her, we need to do it ourselves. Selene, I'm not asking your permission, Damian. I'm telling you what's going to happen. She stood, still holding Danny's hand. You can help me or you can stay out of my way. But I'm done playing defense while she tries to murder the people I love. Damian stood too, and for a long moment they just looked at each other while the space between them filled with all the things they weren't saying. Okay, he said finally, but we do this smart. No emotional reactions. No revenge for revenge's sake. We find her weakness, and we exploit it until she has no choice but to surrender. What's her weakness? Money, control, the ability to manipulate people into doing what she wants. He pulled out his phone, started typing. We take those away and she has nothing left. How? The SEC investigation is just the beginning. We've been treating it like a legal problem. Time to treat it like a war. Yay. By 6 a.m., Damian had assembled a team. Patricia arrived first, looking exhausted but grimly determined. Chen came next with financial records printed and highlighted. Reeves showed up with a laptop and 3 different burner phones. And then a man Selene didn't recognize walked in wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself like someone who'd seen things that normal people only heard about in whispers. Selene, this is Marcus Russo, Damian said. He's a private investigator who specializes in complex financial crimes. Marcus, this is Selene Ward. Russo shook her hand with a grip that suggested he could break bones if necessary. Sorry about your brother. For what it's worth, the woman who dosed him is probably already out of the country. Celeste is smart enough to use contractors who don't have direct connections to her. Can you find her anyway? I can find anyone if you give me enough time and money. He looked at Damian. But the better question is whether finding her helps your larger goal, because taking down one hired hand doesn't stop Celeste from hiring another. So what do you suggest? Russo pulled out a tablet, brought up a series of financial diagrams that looked like conspiracy boards from crime shows. Celeste Laurent has been running a sophisticated investment scheme for approximately 4 years. She uses her charitable foundation as a front to solicit donations from high-net-worth individuals, then funnels that money through a series of shell corporations into offshore accounts. The donors think they're supporting cancer research and children's hospitals. The reality is they're funding Celeste's lifestyle while she provides them with fraudulent tax deduction paperwork. We already knew this, Chen said. What you didn't know is that she's been doing it with help from inside the SEC. Russo swiped to a new screen showing a man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp features. Meet Thomas Whitmore, senior investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's been on Celeste's payroll for 6 years. Every time someone gets close to uncovering her schemes, Whitmore buries the investigation. The room went very quiet. How did we not find this before? Patricia demanded. Because Whitmore is very good at covering his tracks. And because Celeste pays him enough that he's motivated to stay careful. Russo looked at Damian. The SEC investigation you triggered? It's being handled by Whitmore's division, which means Celeste already knows every piece of evidence you've compiled and exactly how to counter it. Selene felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. So the investigation is pointless. Not pointless, just compromised. Russo swiped again, bringing up bank records. But Whitmore's involvement gives us leverage, because if we can prove he's been taking bribes, the SEC has to recuse him and reassign the case. And once that happens, Celeste loses her inside protection. How do we prove he's taking bribes? Damian asked. We already have proof. The question is how we use it. Russo looked around the room. Going to federal prosecutors means this becomes a years-long investigation with uncertain outcomes. Whitmore will lawyer up. Celeste will claim ignorance. The case will drag through courts while she continues operating. What's the alternative? We leverage it privately. Confront Whitmore, show him we have evidence, and give him a choice. Resign quietly and cooperate with taking down Celeste, or we go public and destroy his career along with hers. Patricia frowned. That's extortion. That's strategy. Russo didn't look apologetic. Sometimes the fastest way to stop a wildfire is to remove the fuel source. Whitmore is Celeste's fuel. We remove him. She has nothing left to protect her. Selene thought about Danny lying in a hospital bed with enough drugs in his system to kill him. thought about Celeste's text message promising worse next time. "Do it," she said. Everyone turned to look at her. "Selene," Damian started. "Do it," she repeated. "I don't care if it's extortion. I don't care if it's morally ambiguous. My brother almost died last night because we tried to play by rules Celeste doesn't acknowledge. So we stop playing her game and start playing ours." Patricia and Chen exchanged uncomfortable glances. Reeves just nodded like Selene had finally said something she could work with. Damian studied her face for a long moment. Then he looked at Russo. "Set up the meeting with Whitmore, today if possible, and make sure he understands exactly what's at stake." Russo smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "My pleasure." Bolts. Thomas Whitmore arrived at a coffee shop in Midtown at 2 p.m., looking like a man who'd just realized his world was ending. Damian and Selene sat at a corner table while Russo positioned himself near the door in case Whitmore decided running was preferable to talking. Patricia had stayed behind to handle press inquiries about Danny's hospitalization. The story had already leaked, complete with speculation about whether Selene's troubled family life made her unsuitable for executive leadership. Whitmore ordered coffee he didn't drink and sat down across from them looking trapped. "I know why you called this meeting," he said without preamble, "and I want you to understand that I never intended for things to go this far." "Define this far," Damian said coldly. "Celeste Laurent paying you to bury investigations? Or her nearly murdering someone's brother because you helped her avoid consequences?" Whitmore flinched. "I didn't know she was going to do that, I swear. The financial stuff, yes, I helped with that, but I never signed up for violence." "Yet here we are." Selene leaned forward. "My brother's in the hospital because you helped Celeste believe she was untouchable. So tell me, Mr. Whitmore, exactly how much of his blood is on your hands." "I didn't know it." "That's not an answer." Whitmore's composure cracked. "She approached me 6 years ago, said she needed someone inside the SEC who could make problems disappear. Offered me $200,000 a year just to keep her informed about potential investigations. It seemed harmless at first, just advance warning so she could adjust her business practices." "And then?" Damian prompted. "And then it escalated. She started asking me to bury complaints, to delay investigations, to lose paperwork." Whitmore's hands shook around his coffee cup. "By the time I realized what I'd become, I was in too deep to get out. She had evidence of everything I'd done. Said if I ever tried to stop helping her, she'd ruin me." "So you just kept helping her commit fraud?" "What choice did I have? You could have gone to your superiors, could have cooperated with investigators, could have done literally anything except continue enabling someone you knew was destroying people's lives." Selene's voice was ice. "You had choices, Mr. Whitmore. You just chose wrong every single time." Whitmore looked at her with something that might have been shame. "What do you want from me?" Damian pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "Full cooperation. You resign from the SEC immediately, citing personal reasons. You provide testimony detailing every interaction you've had with Celeste Laurent. You turn over all evidence in your possession, and you pray that when this is over, the prosecutors decide your cooperation is worth more than putting you in prison. And if I refuse, then we take this evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and you spend the next decade fighting charges of bribery, corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Damian's expression didn't change. "Your choice, but understand that either way, your career in federal law enforcement is over. The only question is whether you walk away with your freedom intact." Whitmore stared at the folder like it contained a live grenade. "How do I know you won't turn me in anyway?" "You don't," Selene said. "But you know for certain what happens if you don't cooperate. So really, the decision is pretty simple." Silence stretched between them while Whitmore wrestled with the ruins of his career and whatever remained of his integrity. "I'll need immunity," he said finally. "Written guarantee that anything I provide can't be used against me in future prosecution. We can't promise that, but we can promise to advocate for leniency." Damian pulled out a pen, set it on top of the folder. "Sign the resignation letter, start talking, and maybe you get to keep your pension." Whitmore picked up the pen with shaking hands. 20 minutes later, they had his resignation and a recording of everything Celeste had asked him to do over the past 6 years. Russo escorted Whitmore out through the back entrance while Damian and Selene sat in the sudden silence processing what they'd just done. That felt wrong, Selene said quietly. It was wrong. Damian's voice was flat. We just blackmailed a federal employee into resigning and cooperating with an investigation. Patricia was right. It's extortion. It's possibly illegal. And it's exactly the kind of thing my father would have done. But it worked? That doesn't make it right. Selene looked at him, saw the conflict written across his face, and understood that every choice they made from this point forward would cost them pieces of who they used to be. I know, she said. But if it stops Celeste from hurting anyone else, I can live with being wrong. Damian reached across the table, caught her hand. I hope so. Because this is just the beginning. Tiang, the news broke at 6 p.m. Thomas Whitmore's resignation from the SEC sent shockwaves through financial regulatory circles, especially when it was followed 2 hours later by an announcement that his entire division was under internal review for potential conflicts of interest. By 8 p.m., 3 other investigators had resigned. By 10, the SEC had issued a statement promising a complete audit of all cases Whitmore had handled in the past decade. Celeste's carefully constructed protection collapsed in less than 4 hours. Selene watched it happen from Damian's office, surrounded by the team that had orchestrated the takedown. Chen pulled up news feeds. Reeves monitored social media reactions. Patricia fielded calls from journalists wanting comment. And Damian sat at his desk looking like a man who'd just won a battle he wasn't sure he should have fought. We should be celebrating, Reeves said. This is huge. The SEC is going to reopen every complaint against Celeste without Whitmore running interference. She's finished. She's not finished until she's in handcuffs, Selene said. And even then, she's dangerous. As if summoned by her name, Selene's phone rang. Celeste. Selene answered on speaker. You stupid little bitch, Celeste hissed, all pretense of sophistication burned away by rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've removed your protection, Selene said calmly. Everything else is just consequences. This isn't over. You think taking down Whitmore stops me? I have resources you can't even imagine, connections that go far deeper than one corrupt SEC investigator. And I'm going to use every single one of them to destroy you and everyone you love. You tried that already. My brother survived. Next time he won't. Next time I'll make sure— Celeste. Damian's voice cut through her threats like a blade. That's a recorded line, and you just confessed to attempted murder. I suggest you hang up and call your lawyers. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then Celeste laughed, and the sound was genuinely unhinged. You think you're so smart, both of you. Playing detective, taking down my people, acting like you've won. Her voice dropped to something that made Selene's skin crawl. But you forgot something important, Damian. I know things about you that you've spent 15 years trying to bury. Things about your father. About where your seed money really came from. About the bodies he left behind to build the empire you inherited. Damian's expression went absolutely still. That's right, Celeste continued, vicious satisfaction bleeding through every word. I've been sitting on this information for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. And congratulations. You just gave me that moment. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop this investigation, fire Selene, and publicly apologize for slandering my foundation. Or I'm going to hold a press conference tomorrow morning and tell the world that Damian Virelli's healthcare empire was built on blood money from organized crime. She hung up. The room erupted in chaos. Chen started pulling records. Reeves grabbed her laptop. Patricia began making calls to crisis management contacts. Selene just watched Damian's face drain of color and understood that whatever Celeste was threatening wasn't a bluff. Is it true? She asked quietly. Damian stood, moved to the windows, didn't answer. Damian, is it true? My father gave me $5 million to start my first company when I was 24, he said finally, his voice hollow. I told everyone it was from selling some real estate investments he'd helped me make. That was a lie. The money came from loan sharking operations he ran through his social club. I knew it. I took it anyway. Because I was desperate to prove I could build something outside his world, and I convinced myself that using dirty money to create something clean somehow balanced the scales. Selene felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The entire empire is built on mob money? The initial capital, yes. Everything after that was legitimate. I paid back every dollar, with interest, before my father died. Made sure nothing I built afterward had any connection to his operations. He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. But that doesn't change where it started. Doesn't change that the foundation you've been helping me build was seeded with blood money. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because I spent 15 years trying to bury it. Because I knew that if it ever came out, everything I'd built would be tainted by association. His hands curled into fists. And because I was afraid that if you knew, you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. Selene didn't know how she was looking at him, couldn't process the revelation fast enough to control her expression. All she knew was that the man she'd fallen in love with had just admitted to building his entire identity on a foundation of lies. I need air, she managed. She left before he could stop her. The elevator ride down 47 floors felt like descending into a different reality. The lobby was empty except for security. The street outside was cold and full of strangers who didn't know that the world had just reorganized itself into something unrecognizable. Selene walked 3 blocks before her legs gave out. She ended up sitting on a bench in a small park, staring at nothing, trying to reconcile the Damian she knew. The man who'd held her while she cried, who'd defended her against his ex-wife, who'd built a healthcare foundation to honor his mother, with the 24-year-old who'd accepted mob money because he wanted success badly enough to compromise his morals. Her phone rang. Patricia. Where are you? Patricia demanded. We need you back here. The press is already running with the story. Someone leaked Celeste's threat, and now we have journalists calling asking about Damian's father and whether the foundation is connected to organized crime. I don't care. Selene, I said I don't care. Handle it yourself. She hung up. 3 minutes later, Damian called. She let it go to voicemail. Then her mother called, and her father, and Chen, and Reeves, and finally Danny from his hospital bed asking if the news about Damian was true and whether she was okay. She turned off her phone. 20 minutes later, Damian himself appeared on the bench beside her. How did you find me? She asked. I know how to track people. Comes with the territory of having a father who made people disappear. His voice was rough. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. I just need you to understand that everything I told you about why I built the foundation was true. My mother did die because the system failed her. I do believe in this work. The only lie was where the initial money came from. That's not a small lie, Damian. I know. You built your entire identity on being different from your father, on being clean and legitimate and better than the world you came from. And it was all a performance. All of it, not all of it. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. The work is real. The foundation is real. The lives we've saved are real. The only thing that wasn't real was my pretense that I'd somehow transcended my father's influence, that I'd managed to build something completely separate from his legacy. And now Celeste is going to tell the world the truth. Yes, which means the foundation is finished. The donors will pull funding. The board will demand your resignation. Everything we've built over the past 3 weeks is going to collapse, Damian finished, unless we can find a way to control the narrative before Celeste does. Selene laughed, and it came out bitter. How do you control a narrative when the truth is exactly what your enemy says it is? You tell it yourself. You own it before they can weaponize it. You admit the mistake and make the case that what you've built since then matters more than where you started. That's naive. Maybe, but it's the only option we have. Selene stared at the park in front of them, at the bare trees and the empty playground and the city lights reflecting off low clouds. I need time, she said, to think about whether you want to stay involved, to think about whether I can trust you, whether anything between us is real or if I'm just another piece of your performance. Damian flinched like she'd hit him. Everything between us is real. How do I know that? How do I know you're not just using me the same way you used your father's money, as a tool to build the image you want people to see? Because I've never told anyone else the truth about where the money came from. Because when Celeste threatened to expose me, the first thing I thought about wasn't protecting my reputation or saving the foundation. It was whether you'd still look at me the same way after you knew. His voice cracked. You want to know if this is real? It's the most real thing in my life. It's the only thing I didn't have to perform or calculate or carefully construct. And I'm terrified I just destroyed it by being exactly who I've always been. someone who makes terrible choices and spends years trying to fix them. Selene's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't know if that's enough," she said. "I know." He stood, and the movement felt final. "Take whatever time you need. I'll be at the office dealing with the fallout. If you decide you can't be part of this anymore, I understand. I'll write you a reference letter that gets you any job you want, and I'll make sure Celeste knows you had nothing to do with any of it." He walked away before she could respond. Selene sat alone on the bench while Manhattan hummed around her, trying to figure out how 3 weeks could contain an entire lifetime of choices that all led to this moment. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd turned it off, but apparently it had restarted itself. Text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the address below in 1 hour. Come alone. I have information about Damian that you need to hear. M." The address was an apartment building in Hell's Kitchen. Selene stared at the message, every instinct screaming that this was a trap, that meeting Marcus anywhere was categorically stupid, that she should delete the text and go back to the office and face whatever came next beside Damian. Instead, she stood up and started walking. But the building was older than Selene expected, wedged between a bodega and a laundromat in a neighborhood that smelled like grease and exhaust. 4th floor walk-up. Apartment 4C. Marcus answered on the first knock. "Thanks for coming," he said, and he actually sounded genuine. "I wasn't sure you would. You have 60 seconds before I leave. Talk." Marcus stepped aside to let her in. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, clearly a temporary space, nothing personal, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. "Celeste is using me," Marcus said without preamble. "Has been from the start. She approached me 3 weeks ago, said she knew about our breakup, said she wanted to help me get revenge on you for embarrassing me." "I didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed yourself by cheating. I know, believe me, I know. But at the time I was hurt and angry, and she seemed genuinely sympathetic." He ran a hand through his hair. "She offered to help me file the police complaints, offered to provide evidence, said she had resources that could make your life difficult while you were trying to build your new career. And you just went along with it. At first, yes, but then she started asking me to do other things. Things that felt wrong, like approaching your brother at that bar." Selene's blood ran cold. "You were part of that?" "No, God, no. But Celeste told me afterward, bragged about it, said your brother had been a useful test case for what happened when people didn't cooperate with her plans." Marcus looked sick. "That's when I realized I wasn't helping someone get justified revenge. I was helping a sociopath hurt innocent people. So why tell me this now? Because Celeste called me 3 hours ago. Said she needed me to do something for her tomorrow morning during her press conference." He pulled out his phone, played a voice recording, Celeste's voice, clear and unmistakable. "I need you to stand beside me at the press conference. Play the heartbroken ex-fiancé who Selene abandoned for a richer man. Make it look like you're still devastated. Cry if you can manage it. The more pathetic you seem, the more sympathy we generate." The recording continued. "And Marcus? After the press conference, I need you to file an assault complaint against Damian Virelli. Say he threatened you outside Selene's apartment building last week. Doesn't matter if it's true. We just need to add one more scandal to the pile." Marcus stopped the playback. "I'm not doing it," he said. "I know I've been an asshole. I know I destroyed our relationship and hurt you in ways I can't fix. But I'm not helping her destroy an innocent man's life just because she's having some kind of psychotic break over her divorce." Selene sat down heavily on the worn couch, trying to process this new information on top of everything else that had happened in the past 12 hours. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. "You cheated on me. You filed false police reports. You helped Celeste manufacture evidence against me. Why should I believe anything you say now?" "Because I have proof." Marcus pulled a thumb drive from his pocket, set it on the coffee table between them. "Every conversation I've had with Celeste for the past 3 weeks, every text message, every email, every recorded phone call where she outlined her plans and asked me to help execute them." He paused. "Including the one where she specifically instructed the woman who dosed your brother on exactly how much fentanyl to use." Selene stared at the thumb drive like it might explode. "You recorded her confessing to attempted murder?" "I recorded everything. Started about a week in when I realized she was using me and I might need insurance." Marcus pushed the drive toward her. "It's yours. Give it to the police. Use it however you need to. Just please, Keep my involvement confidential if you can. I know I don't deserve protection, but I'm trying to do the right thing here. Selene picked up the drive, felt the weight of it in her palm. This doesn't make us even, she said. I know. And it doesn't mean I forgive you for what you did. I know that too. Marcus met her eyes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved better than what I gave you. Selene stood, pocketed the drive. You're right. I did. She left Marcus standing in his temporary apartment and walked back out into the November night, carrying evidence that could either save Damian's foundation or destroy it depending on how they chose to use it. Her phone rang. Damian. This time she answered. Where are you? His voice was tight with strain. Patricia said you've been gone for 3 hours. I'm coming back. We need to talk. Is the team still there? Yes, Selene, what's going on? I have something that changes everything. She flagged down a cab. Don't make any statements to the press until I get there. Don't respond to Celeste. Don't do anything. Just wait for me. Selene, do you trust me? Silence. Then, yes. Then wait. She hung up and gave the driver Damian's address, her mind already racing through possibilities and consequences and all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The thumb drive felt like a grenade in her pocket. And somewhere across the city, Celeste Laurent was preparing for a press conference that would either end in her complete victory or her total destruction. Selene just had to figure out which one before tomorrow morning arrived. The war room at Damian's office looked like something from a political thriller. Whiteboards covered with strategy notes, laptops displaying news feeds, Patricia on 3 simultaneous phone calls trying to manage the crisis, Chen running financial models for what happened if they lost 80% of their donor base, Reeves drafting resignation letters that Damian hadn't asked for but everyone knew he'd eventually need. Damian sat at the head of the conference table looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. He stood when Selene walked in. What do you have? He asked. She pulled out the thumb drive, set it on the table. 3 weeks of recorded conversations between Celeste and Marcus, including her confessing to orchestrating Danny's assault and ordering the exact dosage of fentanyl to use. The room went absolutely silent. Where did you get this? Patricia demanded. Marcus gave it to me. He's out. Refuses to participate in Celeste's press conference tomorrow. Selene looked at Damian. This is enough to have her arrested. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. She goes to prison for decades. If we can verify the recordings are authentic, Chen added. They're authentic. Marcus recorded everything because he realized she was using him and wanted insurance. Selene pulled out a chair, sat down before her legs gave out. The question is what we do with it. We give it to the police, Reeves said immediately. End this tonight. And what happens to Damian's foundation when the press finds out we've been sitting on evidence of attempted murder while negotiating with her? Patricia countered. It looks like we used it as leverage instead of going to authorities immediately, which makes us look complicit. We didn't know about it until tonight. Doesn't matter how it looks. Patricia turned to Damian. If we turn this over to police now, the narrative becomes Verelli Foundation caught in criminal conspiracy involving attempted murder, mob money, and corporate espionage. Every donor pulls out. Every patient questions whether they want to be associated with us. The foundation collapses even if Celeste goes to prison. So what's the alternative? Selene asked. We let her hold her press conference? Let her destroy Damian's reputation while we sit on evidence that could stop her? The room erupted in argument. Patricia insisting they needed to control the timing. Reeves arguing they had a legal obligation to report the crime. Chen calculating different scenarios. Russo, who'd been silent until now, standing near the door, watching everything with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact situation play out before. There's a third option, he said finally. Everyone turned to look at him. We give Celeste a choice, Russo continued. We show her we have the recordings. We explain that we can either turn them over to police right now or we can make a deal. She cancels the press conference, publicly withdraws all allegations against Damian, surrenders to the SEC investigation, and agrees to voluntary psychiatric evaluation. In exchange, we give her a 48-hour head start before we turn over the evidence. That's obstruction of justice, Patricia said. That's negotiation. Russo didn't look apologetic. Celeste is dangerous because she feels cornered. Give her an escape route, even a temporary one, and she takes it. Then she's someone else's problem. Or she runs, Chen said, takes the 48 hours and disappears to some non-extradition country with all her hidden money. She might, but that's still better than her holding a press conference that destroys the foundation while we're morally obligated to turn over evidence that makes us look like we've been playing games with attempted murder charges. Damian had been quiet through the entire argument. Now he stood, moved to the windows, looked out at the city like he was trying to find answers in the skyline. "What would your father do?" Selene asked quietly. He turned, and the look he gave her was complicated. "My father would have had her killed 3 weeks ago and slept fine afterward." "That's not what I asked." "I know." He came back to the table, placed both hands flat on the surface. "My father would say that giving her a choice is weakness, that people like Celeste don't respond to mercy or negotiation, that the only language they understand is force." He looked at each person in the room. "And he'd be right. Celeste will take whatever deal we offer, then break it the second she thinks she has an advantage, because that's who she is." "So what do you want to do?" Patricia asked. Damian looked at Selene, and in his eyes she saw every terrible choice he'd ever made and every consequence he'd spent years trying to fix. "I want to be better than my father," he said, "even if it costs me everything." "Damian, we turn over the recordings to the police. Tonight. We don't negotiate. We don't give her warning. We do the right thing regardless of what it costs the foundation." His voice was absolutely certain. "Because if we compromise on this, if we use attempted murder as leverage instead of evidence, then we become exactly what Celeste has been accusing us of being, and I'd rather lose the foundation than lose what's left of my integrity." The room held its breath. Selene felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been twisted and uncertain since he'd confessed about the mob money, now straightening into clarity. "Okay," she said, "we do it your way." Patricia closed her eyes. "This is going to destroy us." "Probably," Damian agreed. "But we'll be destroyed honestly." Russo pulled out his phone. "I'll call my contact at the DA's office. They'll want to move fast before Celeste has a chance to lawyer up and start destroying evidence." An hour later, 2 assistant district attorneys arrived with recording equipment and expressions that suggested they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. By midnight, Celeste Laurent was in custody, arrested at her Central Park West penthouse on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, bribery, and obstruction of justice. By 1 a.m., the news broke on every major outlet. Socialite Celeste Laurent arrested in alleged murder plot. By 2 a.m., Damian's phone was ringing with donors asking what the hell was going on. And by 3 a.m., Selene and Damian sat alone in his office while the rest of the team went home to sleep, both of them too wired and emotionally destroyed to do anything except exist in the wreckage of what they'd just done. "We're going to lose everything," Damian said quietly. "Probably. The board will ask for my resignation tomorrow, or today technically, given what time it is." "Yes. Most of the donors will pull out. The foundation will have to scale back operations significantly. We might have to close the Queen's Clinic." "I know." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were devastated. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this. Sorry you gave up your career to work for someone who turned out to be exactly as compromised as everyone warned you he was." Selene thought about that for a moment, about the past 3 weeks and all the impossible choices they'd made. About standing in a police station hallway while he promised to protect her. About Chinese food at 9:30 and dancing at the gala, and the way he'd looked at her when he said he wanted to be better than his father. "You're not compromised," she said finally. "You're just human. You made mistakes, and you're trying to fix them. That's not the same thing as being corrupt. Tell that to the donors." "I will if you want me to." She moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Damian, listen to me. You could have made a deal with Celeste, could have used those recordings as leverage, could have protected the foundation at the expense of doing the right thing. But you didn't. You chose integrity over survival. That matters." "Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I just destroyed the one good thing I'd managed to build." "You built something good. Past tense. It existed. It helped people. And maybe it's over now, or maybe it's not. But either way, you prove that someone who starts from dirty money can still choose to do clean work." She caught his hand. "That's not nothing, Damian. That's actually everything." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and she felt him shake with everything he'd been holding back. They sat like that while Manhattan turned toward dawn. Two people who'd tried to build something beautiful and maybe destroyed it in the process, still choosing each other despite every reason not to. And outside, the city woke to news that would rewrite both their futures into something neither of them could predict. The point of no return had arrived, and they were standing on the far side of it, together, watching their carefully constructed world burn. Dawn came with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Selene woke still dressed in yesterday's clothes, sprawled across Damian's office couch, with her neck at an angle that guaranteed pain. Damian sat at his desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the blue glow of his laptop screen, looking like he hadn't slept at all. "What time is it?" she managed, her voice hoarse. 6:40. Board meeting is at 8. He didn't look up from whatever he was reading. "Morrison called 20 minutes ago. Said it's a formality, but I should prepare remarks." "Remarks for what?" "My resignation." He finally met her eyes, and the exhaustion there was profound. "It's over, Selene. The foundation, my position, all of it. Morrison was very clear that the board considers my continued leadership untenable, given the circumstances." Selene sat up, winced at the protest from her spine. "They're forcing you out before the SEC investigation even concludes?" "They don't need the investigation to conclude. Public perception is already destroyed. 3 more donors pulled funding overnight. The Wall Street Journal is running a front-page story about mob money and healthcare fraud. CNN wants me to come on and defend myself against allegations I've been running a criminal enterprise disguised as charity work." His laugh was bitter. "Turns out admitting your seed money came from loan sharking doesn't inspire confidence in your philanthropic intentions. So fight back. Tell your story. Make them understand. Understand what? That I knowingly accepted dirty money because I wanted success badly enough to compromise my principles? That I spent 15 years lying about it?" Damian closed his laptop with enough force to make Selene flinch. "There's no version of that story that makes me look like anything except exactly what Celeste always said I was. My father's son, pretending to be something better." "That's not true, isn't it?" He stood, started pacing. "I built an empire on blood money, Selene. Doesn't matter that I paid it back. Doesn't matter that everything after was legitimate. The foundation exists because I used loan shark profits as seed capital. Every clinic we opened, every patient we helped, every life we saved, all of it traces back to my father breaking people's kneecaps when they couldn't pay their debts." "So you're just giving up? Letting them destroy everything you built?" "I'm accepting responsibility for my choices." He stopped pacing, looked at her with eyes that had given up. "The foundation will survive without me. Morrison already has a replacement CEO lined up, someone with an actual clean background who can rebuild donor confidence. You should stay on, help them transition. Your reputation is still salvageable if you distance yourself from me now." Selene stood, crossed the space between them, and slapped him. The crack of palm against cheek echoed in the silent office. Damian's head snapped to the side. He touched his face, looked at her with something between shock and recognition. "I didn't survive the past 3 weeks to watch you quit," Selene said, her voice shaking with fury. "I didn't defend you to your board, didn't stand beside you through Celeste's attacks, didn't risk my entire career on someone I barely knew just to watch you fold the second things get difficult. This isn't difficult, Selene. This is impossible. Everything worth doing is impossible until someone does it anyway." She grabbed his jacket, yanked him close enough that he had no choice but to look at her. "You told me you wanted to be better than your father. You told me the work mattered more than the scandal. So prove it. Stop hiding behind shame and fight for what you built." "How?" The word came out broken. "Tell me how I fight this. Tell me how I stand in front of donors and press and patients and convince them to trust someone whose entire foundation is literally built on criminal proceeds. You tell the truth. All of it. No more hiding, no more shame, just the actual story of who you were and who you chose to become." Selene's grip on his jacket tightened. "You were 24 years old and desperate to escape your father's world. You made a choice you regret. And then you spent the next 15 years trying to fix it by building something good. That's not a scandal, Damian. That's called being human. The board won't care. Fuck the board." The profanity shocked them both. "You don't need the board. You don't need Morrison or his replacement CEO, or any of these people who are so quick to abandon ship the second it's convenient. What you need is to remind everyone why this foundation exists in the first place. Damian stared at her like she was speaking a language he'd forgotten how to understand. And how do I do that? We go to Brooklyn, to the clinic where your mother died. We bring the press. We bring the patients. We bring everyone who's been helped by the work you've done. And we make them choose. Do they care more about where the money came from 15 years ago, or about the lives being saved right now? That's insane, does see. So is everything else we've done in the past 3 weeks. Selene released his jacket, stepped back. You have 2 hours before the board meeting. You can spend them preparing resignation remarks, or you can spend them preparing to fight. Your choice. She walked out before he could argue. Fuck. Patricia found her in the hallway 10 minutes later, looking like she'd been awake all night running damage control. Please tell me you're not planning what I think you're planning, Patricia said. Then I won't tell you. Selene kept walking toward her office. Selene, stop. Listen to me. I've been doing crisis management for 2 decades. I know when a situation is salvageable and when it's not. This is not. Everything is salvageable until you stop trying. That's naive optimism talking. Patricia grabbed her arm, forced her to stop. Damian's reputation is destroyed. The foundation is hemorrhaging money. The press has already decided he's guilty. Taking this fight public just extends the pain without changing the outcome. What would you have us do instead? Surrender quietly? Let Morrison install some puppet CEO who'll spend the next 5 years apologizing for Damian's existence? I'd have you protect what can still be protected. Your career, for instance. You're young, talented, and still mostly clean if you separate yourself now. Walk away, make a statement about being deceived, and you land on your feet at any firm in the city. Selene pulled her arm free. I'm not walking away. Why not? What exactly do you think you're saving here? The one person who looked at me on the worst day of my life and asked who made me cry? Selene met Patricia's eyes. You want to know why I'm not walking away? Because Damian could have hired anyone, could have gone with someone more experienced, someone with better connections, someone who hadn't just walked into his office with mascara running down her face. But he chose me, trusted me, gave me a chance to build something that mattered. So no, Patricia, I'm not walking away just because it's strategically sound. Patricia studied her for a long moment. You're in love with him. That's not relevant. It's the only thing that's relevant, because love makes people stupid, makes them fight battles they can't win, and sacrifice themselves for causes that are already lost. Patricia's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I've seen this exact scenario play out a dozen times. The outcome never changes. Then I guess I'll be number 13. Selene left Patricia standing in the hallway and went to make phone calls that would either save Damian's foundation or finish destroying what little remained of her own reputation. By 7:30, she had lined up 6 families whose children had been treated at the Brooklyn clinic. By 7:40, she'd contacted 3 journalists known for actually investigating stories instead of just repeating headlines. By 7:50, she'd arranged for the clinic's medical director to speak about patient outcomes and mortality rates. At 7:55, Damian appeared in her doorway. You're serious about this, he said. Completely. It won't work. Morrison and the board have already made up their minds. Then we change their minds. Or we bypass them completely and take this directly to the people whose opinions actually matter. Selene grabbed her coat. The families will be at the clinic by 9. Press arrives at 9:30. You need to be there at 9:15 to talk to the patients before cameras show up. Selene, are you coming or not? He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he grabbed his own coat and said, Let's go. They made it to the Brooklyn clinic by 8:40, driving through morning traffic and tense silence. The building was small and slightly run down, wedged between a bodega and a check-cashing place in Sunset Park. A faded sign read, Verelli Community Health Center. Inside, the waiting room was packed, not with the families Selene had called, though they were there, holding children and looking nervous about the cameras they'd been told were coming. The room was full of patients, dozens of them, people who'd shown up for their appointments and found out the clinic might be closing and decided to stay anyway. An elderly woman in a headscarf stood when Damian walked in. "Mr. Verelli," she said in accented English. "They're saying on the news you're a criminal, that this clinic is dirty money." Damian stopped, and Selene watched his face cycle through shame and exhaustion, and something that might have been determination. "It's true," he said. "Part of it, anyway. The money I used to start my first company came from my father's illegal operations. I didn't earn it, honestly. I took it knowing where it came from because I wanted success badly enough to compromise my principles." The room went very quiet. "But the clinic isn't dirty money," Damian continued, his voice gaining strength. "Every dollar that built this place came from legitimate business, from companies I built after I'd paid back what I owed, from pharmaceutical partnerships and private donations and my own salary from work I actually did." He looked around the room at faces he clearly recognized. "Mrs. Chen, when your grandson had pneumonia last winter and you couldn't afford the medication, where did you go?"
"Here," the elderly woman said quietly. "Mr. Rodriguez, when you needed insulin and your insurance refused to cover it, who helped you?" A man in his 50s raised his hand. "You did." "Sarah Martinez, when your daughter needed surgery and every hospital said you needed to pay up front, who found you a surgeon who'd work with what you could afford?" A young woman with a baby on her hip started crying. "You did, Mr. Virelli."
Damian's hands were shaking. "I'm not telling you this to make you grateful. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something. I made terrible choices when I was young, choices I regret. But I've spent the past 15 years trying to fix those choices by building something that actually helps people. And now there are powerful people who want to shut this clinic down because the story of where I came from is more interesting than the story of what I built." His voice cracked. "So I'm asking, not as someone who deserves your support, but as someone who's trying very hard to be better than he used to be, will you help me fight for this place?" The silence that followed felt like the entire room holding its breath. Then Mrs. Chen stood. "My grandson is alive because of this clinic. I'll fight." Mr. Rodriguez stood. "My daughter still has her father because you got me insulin when I needed it. I'll fight." One by one, people stood. Parents with children. Elderly patients. Young people who'd been treated for everything from asthma to broken bones to complications from diabetes. By the time the press arrived at 9:30, the waiting room was full of people holding homemade signs that read, "Save our clinic," and "Verelli saved my life." The journalists looked confused. This wasn't the story they'd come to cover. Selene stepped forward, positioned herself between the cameras and Damian. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "I know you're here because you heard about Damian Virelli's past, about money that came from illegal sources, about a foundation built on questionable origins, and all of that is true. But I want you to meet some people before you decide what story you're going to tell." She gestured to a woman holding a 5-year-old girl with thick glasses and a bright smile. "This is Maria Santos and her daughter Elena. Elena was born with congenital heart defects. 3 hospitals turned them away because Maria didn't have insurance and couldn't pay up front. The Verelli Foundation paid for Elena's surgery and all her follow-up care. Elena is alive because this clinic exists." Maria stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "I don't care where the money came from 15 years ago. I care that my daughter is alive today." Selene gestured to a teenage boy with a prosthetic leg. "This is James Chen. He lost his leg in a car accident 2 years ago. His family's insurance wouldn't cover the kind of prosthetic he needed to play basketball again. The foundation covered it. James is playing varsity basketball this year because this clinic exists." James held up his prosthetic. "Mr. Verelli gave me my life back." One by one, Selene introduced patients. A woman whose breast cancer was caught early through free screenings. A man whose diabetes was being managed with medications the clinic provided at cost. A child whose asthma inhaler came from the foundation's pharmacy program. The journalists started taking notes. Damian stood to the side watching, and Selene could see him struggling not to break down completely. When she'd introduced the last patient, she turned to face the cameras directly. "Damian Virelli made mistakes," she said. "He's admitted that publicly. He's taken responsibility, and he spent 15 years building something that saves lives every single day. So yes, you can write about where the money came from. You can focus on the scandal and the mob connections and all the things that make good headlines. Or you can write about this." She gestured to the room full of patients. "Ibez, You can write about what redemption actually looks like when someone chooses to spend their life fixing their mistakes instead of running from them. A reporter from the Times raised his hand. Ms. Ward, some people would say that using these patients as props to defend Mr. Verelli is manipulative. These aren't props, Maria Santos interrupted, her voice sharp. We're real people whose lives depend on this clinic staying open, and we're here because we choose to be, not because anyone forced us. Mr. Verelli, another reporter called out, do you have any response to allegations that your foundation has been operating illegally? Damian stepped forward, and Selene moved aside to give him space. Every operation of this foundation is completely legal and thoroughly documented, he said, his voice steady now. We work with licensed physicians. We follow all medical regulations. We report our finances accurately. The only question anyone has raised is about where my seed capital came from 15 years ago, before this foundation even existed. He paused. And yes, that money came from my father's loan sharking operations. I've admitted that. I've been honest about it. What I won't apologize for is using that mistake as motivation to build something that actually helps people. So you don't regret taking the money? I regret where it came from. I regret that I compromised my principles for success, but I don't regret what I built with it, because every patient in this room is alive or healthier because I made the choice to turn dirty money into clean work. His eyes hardened. And if you think that's not enough, if you think I should spend the rest of my life apologizing instead of helping, then write that story. But know that when you do, you're advocating for closing a clinic that serves 10,000 patients a year who have nowhere else to go. The room erupted in questions. Cameras flashed. Patients started chanting, "Save our clinic," loud enough to rattle the windows. Selene watched it unfold and realized they'd just done something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, and they wouldn't know which until the stories ran. Chit-chat. The board meeting started at 10. Selene and Damian arrived 20 minutes late, walking into the conference room to find Morrison and 6 other board members looking various combinations of angry and uncomfortable. You were supposed to be here at 8, Morrison said coldly. We were busy, Damian replied, taking his seat at the head of the table like he still had every right to be there. In Brooklyn, at the clinic, talking to patients about what this foundation means to them. That was inappropriate. What's inappropriate is calling a meeting to force my resignation without actually understanding what you'd be destroying. Damian pulled out his laptop, connected it to the conference room display. I'd like to show you something before we proceed. He pulled up a video Selene had filmed on her phone. The patients in the waiting room, their testimonials. Maria Santos holding Elena while she explained that her daughter was alive because of the foundation's work. The board members watched in uncomfortable silence. When it ended, Damian closed the laptop. That's what you're voting to destroy, he said quietly. Not my reputation, not my career. 10,000 patients who depend on clinics across 4 boroughs. Families who have nowhere else to go. Children who are alive because we exist. Morrison cleared his throat. Damian, no one is disputing the good work the foundation has done. But the optics of your continued leadership, the optics will improve once people understand the full story. I've been watching the social media response to this morning's press conference. It's overwhelmingly supportive. Social media support doesn't translate to donor confidence. Actually, it does. Chen spoke up for the first time, looking at his tablet. We've received 43 new donation pledges in the past 90 minutes. Small amounts mostly, but they total just over $200,000. And I'm getting emails from 3 philanthropic organizations asking about expanded partnership opportunities. Morrison's expression flickered. That's hardly enough to offset the major donors we've lost. But the major donors who pulled out weren't committed to our mission anyway, Selene interrupted. They were committed to the prestige of being associated with Damian Virelli when he was untouchable. The people donating now actually care about the work. Ms. Ward, with respect, you've been with this organization for less than a month, which means I see it more clearly than you do. You're so focused on protecting the foundation's image that you've forgotten what the foundation actually exists to do. She stood, moved to stand beside Damian. You want to force him out because you think it'll stabilize donor relations. but all you'll accomplish is proving that this organization values appearance over substance, and that's a reputation you'll never recover from." The room was silent. Then one of the other board members, Elizabeth Hartman, a retired surgeon who'd been on the board since the beginning, spoke up. "I think we should table the resignation discussion," she said, "at least until we see how the next week plays out. If public support continues growing, we'd be fools to force out the one person whose story is actually driving that support." Morrison looked like he'd been slapped. "Elizabeth, we agreed." "You agreed? I said I'd listen to Damian's perspective before making a decision. I've listened. And I think Ms. Ward is right. Forcing him out now sends exactly the wrong message." Two other board members nodded agreement. Morrison's jaw tightened. "Fine. We'll reconvene next Monday. But Damian, understand that this is a stay of execution, not a pardon. If the situation hasn't stabilized by then, this conversation happens again, and the outcome won't be negotiable." "Understood," Damian said. The meeting ended. Selene and Damian walked out together, neither speaking until they were alone in the elevator. "That was close," she said finally. "Too close." Damian leaned against the elevator wall, exhaustion creeping back into his features. "We bought a week. Maybe less if something else goes wrong." "Then we make sure nothing goes wrong." "You can't control everything, Selene." The elevator lurched to a sudden stop. Emergency lights flickered on. An alarm started blaring. "You were saying?" Selene muttered. Damian was already pressing the emergency call button. "This is Damian Virelli. We're stuck in elevator 3. What's the status?" Static, then a security guard's voice. "Mr. Virelli, we have a situation. Building security has been breached. I need you to stay in the elevator until we've cleared." The line went dead. Damian and Selene looked at each other. "That's not good," she said. "No, it's really not." He pulled out his phone. No signal in the elevator shaft. They stood in the emergency lighting, both thinking the same thing but neither wanting to say it out loud. Then Selene's phone buzzed, somehow still getting reception despite Damian's being dead. Text from unknown number. "Trapped rats die in cages. You should have taken the deal." "That's impossible," Selene breathed. "Celeste is in custody. Her lawyers got her out on bail this morning. Patricia called while we were at the clinic." Damian moved to the elevator panel, started examining it. "I didn't tell you because you had enough to worry about. So she's free, and she's here, and we're trapped in an elevator she somehow stopped." Selene's pulse hammered. "Damian, what the hell is happening?" "Nothing good." He pulled the emergency panel open, revealing wiring and circuitry. "Can you climb?" "What? The maintenance ladder. Can you climb it?" Selene looked up at the emergency hatch in the elevator ceiling. "How far?" "We're between 42 and 43, so probably about 20 feet straight up to the next floor access, in a pencil skirt and heels." "Would you prefer to wait here and see what Celeste has planned?" Point taken. Damian boosted her up to reach the hatch. It opened with a rusty screech, revealing the dark shaft above. Cold air, and the smell of grease and machinery. Selene pulled herself through, felt the elevator sway slightly under her shifting weight. The ladder was mounted to the shaft wall about 3 feet away. "You're going to have to jump," Damian called up. "I hate you right now." "Noted. Jump anyway." Selene kicked off her heels, let them fall into the darkness below. Then she crouched on the elevator roof, calculated angles and distances, and the very real possibility of falling to her death, and jumped. Her hands caught the ladder. Her body slammed against the wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She hung there gasping while her arms screamed in protest. "You okay?" Damian's voice, concerned. "Fantastic, living my best life." She started climbing. 20 feet had never felt so far. The ladder was slick with old grease. Her hands kept slipping, her shoulders burned. Halfway up, her foot missed a rung, and she swung out over empty space, held only by her grip on the ladder. "Don't look down, don't look down, don't look down." She made it to the 43rd floor access door and nearly sobbed with relief. The door was locked from the inside. "Are you kidding me?" she shouted into the shaft. "What's wrong?" Damian called from below. "Door's locked. Can you break it?" "With what?" "My overwhelming sense of frustration." "Use the emergency release. Should be a red lever to the right of the handle." Selene felt along the doorframe, found the lever, pulled. The door swung open onto an empty hallway. She crawled through, turned to watch Damian make the same jump she had. He made it look easy, which was infuriating. He climbed fast, pulled himself through the door, and immediately started moving down the hallway. "Where are we going?" Selene asked, running to keep up despite her bare feet. "My office. I have something there we're going to need." They made it to his office to find the door standing open and Celeste Laurent sitting behind his desk. She looked different than she had at the gala. Her perfect appearance had cracked into something wilder. Hair pulled back too tight, makeup slightly smeared, eyes that moved too fast and focused on nothing. "Hello, Damian," she said pleasantly. "Hello, Selene, so glad you could make it." Two men in security uniforms, not the building's usual guards, stood on either side of the door. Both held guns pointed casually at the floor in a way that suggested they knew exactly how to use them. Damian stepped in front of Selene. "Let her go, Celeste. Whatever this is about, it's between you and me." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong." Celeste stood, moved around the desk. "This is very much about Selene, about the fact that you chose her, that you risked everything to protect her, that you're standing in front of her right now like some kind of hero when we both know what you really are." "I'm not my father, Aki. You're exactly your father." The shout came out raw and desperate. "You just hide it better. All that nobility, all that talk about redemption and doing good, it's performance, Damian. It's always been performance. And I'm so sick of watching you fool everyone into thinking you're something you're not." "What do you want, Celeste?" "I want you to admit it. Admit that you built your empire on violence and blood. Admit that every good thing you've ever done is tainted by where you came from. Admit that you're not better than your father. You're just better at lying about it." Damian's hands curled into fists. "I've never pretended to be perfect. But you pretend to be redeemed. That's worse." Celeste laughed, and the sound was broken. "You actually believe your own story. You actually think that building some clinics erases what you are. But I see through you. I always have." "Then what was the point of marrying me?" "Because I thought I could fix you. I thought if I just loved you enough, supported you enough, helped you enough, you'd finally let go of all this guilt and just be who you're supposed to be." Her voice cracked. "But instead you threw everything away. Our marriage, our life, everything we built together. All for some fantasy about being better than you are." Selene watched this unfold and understood that she was seeing something deeply broken, not evil, not calculated, just someone who'd loved the wrong person in the wrong way and broken herself trying to fix him. "Celeste," she said quietly, "it's over. The police know about the attempted murder. They have recordings. You trying to hurt us now just makes things worse for you." Celeste turned to her, and the rage in her eyes was absolute. "I don't care about worse. I don't care about consequences. I care about making sure he understands what it feels like to lose everything." One of the armed men shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, this wasn't part of the agreement." "The agreement changed." Celeste pulled something from her pocket, a remote detonator. "I had my people install insurance throughout the building, small charges, nothing that would bring the whole structure down, just enough to trap certain floors and make evacuation difficult." Damian's face went white. "There are 300 people in this building." "Oh, I know. I counted." Celeste's smile was terrifying. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand in front of cameras in the lobby and admit that everything you've built is a lie. Admit that you're a criminal pretending to be a philanthropist. Admit that Selene was sleeping with you before she left her fiancé. Admit every ugly truth you've been hiding. And if I don't, then I press this button and we find out how quickly emergency services can evacuate a building with half its stairwells blocked by rubble." The room went very still. Selene looked at the detonator, at Celeste's shaking hand, at the two armed men who were clearly having second thoughts about whatever they'd been paid to do. "You won't do it," she said. "Won't I?" "No, because you're not actually crazy. You're hurt and angry and desperate, but you're not a mass murderer." Selene took a step forward, felt Damian try to stop her, and shook him off. "You loved him once. Maybe you still do. And people who actually love someone don't kill 300 innocent people just to punish them." "You don't know what I'm capable of." "Huh. Yes, I do. You're capable of fraud and manipulation and hurting people who threaten what you want to protect. But you're not capable of this. Because if you were, you would have pressed that button the second we walked through the door instead of talking. Celeste's hand was shaking badly now. The detonator trembled. You took him from me, she whispered. I had him first. I built a life with him, and you just walked in and destroyed everything. No. Damian's voice was gentle. You destroyed it yourself, Celeste. Years before I even met Selene. You destroyed it by trying to control me instead of loving me, by threatening the foundation, by making everything a competition you had to win. I was trying to protect you. From what? From trying to be better than I was? From actually doing something meaningful? He took a step toward her, hands visible and non-threatening. You're right that I'm my father's son. I probably always will be. But that doesn't mean I have to become him. And it doesn't mean you have to destroy yourself trying to prove I'm worse than I want to be. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. I loved you. I know, and I'm sorry I couldn't love you the way you needed. I'm sorry I was too focused on my own guilt to see how badly I was hurting you. Damian extended his hand. But this doesn't fix anything. This just makes everything worse for both of us. I don't know how to stop, Celeste said, and she sounded young and lost, and nothing like the sophisticated woman who'd threatened them at the gala. You give me the detonator, you tell these men to leave, and you let me call you a lawyer who isn't being paid to enable your worst impulses. Celeste looked at the device in her hand like she'd forgotten it was there. The silence stretched. One of the armed men cleared his throat. Ma'am, I'm leaving. This is way beyond what I signed up for. He walked out. The other one followed immediately after. Now it was just the three of them. Celeste, Damian, and Selene in an office overlooking Manhattan, while somewhere below 300 people went about their day having no idea how close they'd just come to disaster. I can't go to prison, Celeste whispered. I can't survive that. Then fight, Selene said. Not like this, but actually fight. Get real help. Take responsibility. Show the court you understand what you did wrong, and you're trying to fix it. Why are you helping me? I tried to kill your brother. Because Damian's right. You're not actually evil. You're just broken. And I know what it's like to be broken. Celeste looked at her for a long moment. Then she set the detonator on the desk and collapsed into Damian's chair, crying so hard her whole body shook. Damian grabbed the detonator, carefully removed the battery, and pulled out his phone to call building security. Selene stood there on shaking legs, adrenaline finally catching up with her, and wondered how they'd managed to survive 3 weeks that felt like 3 lifetimes. Deche. The fallout was immediate and complicated. Police arrested Celeste on multiple additional charges including terrorism threats, attempted bombing, and unlawful imprisonment. Her lawyers tried to argue temporary insanity. The DA's office wasn't interested. Building security found the explosive charges exactly where Celeste had said they'd be, small, sophisticated, and positioned to cause maximum chaos without actually bringing down the structure. Bomb squad spent 6 hours clearing them while the building was evacuated, and every news station in the city ran footage of people streaming onto the sidewalk in confusion. By evening, the story had shifted completely. Not Verelli built empire on mob money, but healthcare mogul stops ex-wife's bombing plot. Saves hundreds. Not Foundation's questionable origins, but Damian Virelli talks down armed terrorist while protecting his director. The narrative flipped so fast Selene got whiplash watching it happen. Morrison called at 7 p.m. The board met an emergency session. We're withdrawing the resignation request. The optics of forcing out someone who just prevented a terrorist attack would be catastrophic. So you're keeping him because it's strategically sound, Selene said flatly. Not because you actually believe in the work. Does the motivation matter if the outcome is the same? Yes, it matters. She hung up before he could respond. Damian found her on the roof of her apartment building at midnight, sitting on the ledge with her bare feet dangling over empty air. That's dangerous, he said. So is everything else we've done lately. She didn't look at him. Celeste's lawyers are arguing she had a psychotic break, that years of stress and medication interactions made her temporarily insane. Probably true. Doesn't make what she did okay. No, but it makes her more sad than evil. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. The charges against her are serious enough that she'll be in psychiatric care for years regardless.
The DA made that very clear. Good. They sat in silence, watching the city glitter below them like spilled diamonds. You saved a lot of people today, Damian said finally. We saved them, together. Still counts. Caught her hand, laced their fingers together. The board wants me to stay. I heard. But I'm thinking about stepping down anyway. Selene turned to look at him. Why? Because Morrison was right about one thing. My continued presence is always going to be controversial. There's always going to be questions about my past, doubts about my intentions, and I don't want the foundation to suffer because I'm too proud to let someone else lead. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Selene, you built this. You know it better than anyone. You care about it more than anyone. Stepping down because you're afraid of being controversial is just another form of running away. She squeezed his hand. Besides, I didn't climb a goddamn elevator shaft in a pencil skirt just to watch you quit. Damian laughed, and it was the first genuine sound of joy she'd heard from him in days. What if I stay and everything falls apart anyway? Then we rebuild. Again. As many times as it takes. She leaned her head against his shoulder. That's what we do, right? We keep building even when it's impossible. Is that what we do? It's what I'm choosing to do. You can choose something different if you want. Damian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I choose you. Everything else is negotiable. Selene felt something warm unfold in her chest. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her there on the roof with the city spread out below them like a promise. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Selene felt like maybe they'd actually survive this. Then her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed Danny Mobile, and her heart jumped. Danny, are you okay? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. The police just left. They arrested the woman who dosed me, found her trying to leave the country. Her brother's voice was bright with relief. They said she's cooperating, giving evidence against Celeste in exchange for reduced charges. That's great, Danny. That's really great. There's something else. He hesitated. The detective said you and Damian stopped Celeste from bombing his building today. Said you basically saved my life by making sure she couldn't finish what she started. Selene closed her eyes. It wasn't that simple. Selene, let me say thank you. You've spent 3 weeks protecting me and I didn't even realize it. His voice cracked. So, thank you, and tell Damian thank you too. And also tell him he better be good to you or he's going to have to deal with me. Despite everything, Selene smiled. I'll pass that along. She hung up. Damian was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your brother threatened me, he said. Apparently. I respect that. They sat there wrapped around each other while the November cold settled in and the city hummed its endless song, and somewhere below 300 people went home to families having no idea how close they'd come to disaster. Selene's phone buzzed again. Text from Patricia. 3 major news networks want exclusive interviews. WSJ is retracting their fraud allegations story. You and Damian are being called heroes. This is the outcome we needed. Well done. Another text, this one from Chen. New donations, $1.2 million since this afternoon. Foundation is officially stable. Also, the Brooklyn Clinic has a 3-month waiting list now. People specifically requesting to be seen at the place where Damian's mother died. And finally, from Reeves, Morrison just submitted his resignation from the board. Says he can't in good conscience remain after advocating to remove you. Elizabeth Hartman is the new chair. She wants to meet Monday to discuss expansion plans. Selene showed the messages to Damian. He read them in silence, his expression cycling through surprise and relief, and something that looked like disbelief. We won, he said finally, like he couldn't quite believe it. We survived. There's a difference. Is there? Winning suggests it's over. Surviving means we get to keep fighting. She turned to face him fully. So what do we do now? Damian thought about that for a moment. Then he stood, pulled her to her feet, and said, We build. We expand the clinics. We help more people. We prove that surviving your worst mistakes is possible if you're willing to do the work. Just like that? Just like that. What about us? What about us? Do we tell people? Do we keep it quiet? Do we... Damian kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate and thorough and leaving absolutely no room for doubt about his intentions. When he pulled back,
His eyes were bright. "I'm done hiding," he said, "from my past, from my mistakes, from anything that matters. So yes, we tell people. We tell everyone. And if they have a problem with it, that's their issue to solve, not ours." Selene felt herself smiling despite the exhaustion and the terror and everything they'd just survived. "Okay," she said, "let's do that." They stayed on the roof until nearly 2 a.m., planning and talking and occasionally just existing in the kind of silence that only worked between people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. And when they finally went inside, Selene realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, she'd stopped running from her worst day and started running towards something better. The foundation was stable. Celeste was facing consequences. Danny was safe. And she was falling in love with a man whose empire was built on blood money, but whose soul was bent toward redemption. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was real. And that, Selene decided, was enough. 3 months later, Selene stood in the conference room of the newly renovated Queen's Clinic watching snowfall over Jackson Heights and thinking about how much could change in 90 days. The foundation had expanded to 8 clinics across 4 boroughs. Donor contributions had tripled. Patient wait times had dropped by 40%. The board, now chaired by Elizabeth Hartman with 3 new members who actually believed in the mission, had approved a 5-year growth plan that would bring healthcare access to underserved communities across the entire tri-state area. On paper, everything looked like victory. In practice, it felt more complicated than that. Damian appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking tired in a way that had become familiar over the past months. Not the exhaustion of crisis, but the slower burn of someone carrying weight that never quite lifted. "Meeting starts in 10, he said, handing her one of the cups. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be to tell a room full of people that we're not perfect. We never claimed to be perfect. No. But we let them believe we'd figured out how to be better." Selene took a sip, grateful for the warmth. "Today we admit we're still learning." The quarterly stakeholder meeting had been Elizabeth's idea, a chance for patients, donors, staff, and community leaders to ask questions and hold the foundation accountable. Transparency as policy instead of crisis response. It was smart and terrifying in equal measure. Chen arrived first, carrying his tablet and a folder thick with financial reports. Reeves came next with talking points and media advisories. Then the stakeholders filtered in, clinic directors, community organizers, the families Selene had called to the Brooklyn Clinic 3 months ago, journalists from outlets that had actually bothered to follow the story past the initial scandal. And sitting in the back row, quiet and watchful, was Matteo Virelli. Selene had only met Damian's father once, 2 weeks ago at a small restaurant in Red Hook. He was 74, dying slowly from lung cancer, and looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd built an empire on violence and lived long enough to watch his son try to dismantle it. Damian had warned her that his father would probably attend, had said it without emotion, like mentioning the weather. Now Matteo sat there in an expensive coat that hung loose on his thinning frame, his eyes sharp despite the illness, watching his son prepare to present to a room full of people who 6 months ago would have been terrified to be in the same building as him. The meeting started at 10 sharp. Elizabeth Hartman opened with a statement about the Foundation's commitment to accountability and growth. Chen presented financials, where the money came from, where it went, projections for the next fiscal year. Clinic directors reported on patient outcomes and expansion challenges. Then it was Damian's turn. He stood at the front of the room and for a moment just looked at the assembled faces. People who depended on him. People who defended him. People who still weren't sure whether to trust him. 3 months ago, he started, his voice steady but not quite calm. "A lot of you found out things about me that I'd spent 15 years trying to hide. About where my money came from. About choices I made when I was younger and desperate and convinced that the ends justified the means. Bo ikiti stormatin." He paused. "I want to start by saying that I was wrong. The ends don't justify the means. They never did. And building something good on a foundation of bad choices doesn't erase those choices. It just means you have to work twice as hard to prove that what you built matters more than where you started." The room was absolutely silent. "I've spent the past 3 months trying to figure out how to talk about this honestly without making it sound like I'm asking for forgiveness I haven't earned," Damian continued. "And the truth is, I don't know how to do that. So instead, I'm just going to tell you what I've learned. He looked directly at Maria Santos, sitting in the third row with Elena beside her. I learned that the people I tried to help don't actually care about my redemption arc. They care about whether their kids can get the medication they need. They care about whether we'll still be here next year when they're sick. They care about results, not my feelings about my past. Maria nodded slowly. Damian's gaze shifted to Mr. Rodriguez. I learned that transparency is harder than I thought it would be. That admitting mistakes publicly feels like ripping open wounds that never quite healed. But it's also the only way to build trust with people who have every reason not to trust me. He looked at his father in the back row. And I learned that you can spend your whole life running from who you used to be, but eventually you have to stop running and face it. Because the only thing harder than acknowledging your mistakes is watching them destroy everything you've built to fix them. Mateo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. So here's what I'm asking, Damian said, turning back to the full room. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget where I came from. I'm asking you to judge this foundation on what it does, not on what I used to be. And if you can't do that, if my presence makes it impossible for you to support this work, then I understand. The foundation is bigger than me now. It'll survive without me if it has to. He sat down. The silence that followed felt like the entire room processing what they'd just heard. Then a woman Selene didn't recognize stood up. My name is Rosa Chen, she said, and Selene realized with a start that this was Mrs. Chen's daughter. My son is alive because of the clinic in Sunset Park. 6 months ago, he had pneumonia, and we had no insurance and no money, and every hospital we went to turned us away. Your clinic didn't ask about money, didn't ask about our immigration status, just helped my son get well. She paused. I don't care where your money came from 15 years ago, Mr. Verelli. I care that my son can breathe. She sat down. Another person stood, James Chen's father. I care that my son can play basketball again. That he didn't spend the rest of his life defined by what he lost in that accident. His voice was thick. Whatever mistakes you made, you've spent years trying to fix them. That's more than most people do. One by one, patients and family members stood to speak. About lives saved, children helped, emergencies managed, medications provided when nowhere else would help. By the time the last person sat down, Selene had tears streaming down her face and wasn't bothering to hide them. Damian looked like someone had just given him permission to breathe after holding his breath for 15 years. The meeting ended with commitments and questions and plans for expansion. People lingered to talk, to shake hands, to schedule appointments. And through it all, Matteo Virelli sat in the back row watching his son with an expression Selene couldn't quite read. When the room finally emptied, he stood and walked to where Damian waited. That took guts, Matteo said, his voice rough from the cancer eating his lungs. Admitting all that publicly. I learned from the best, Damian replied. You always said never show weakness. I'm testing the theory that being honest about weakness is actually strength. And? How's that working out? Ask me in a year. Matteo laughed, then coughed, wet and painful. Damian moved to help him, but the old man waved him off. I'm fine. Still dying, but fine for another few weeks at least. He looked at Selene. You must be the woman who convinced my son that honesty was better than strategy. I'm Selene Ward, and I didn't convince him of anything. He figured it out himself. Don't let her fool you, Damian said quietly. She's been dragging me toward being a better person since the day we met. Good. You needed dragging. Matteo studied her with eyes that had seen too much. My son tell you about me? Some. He tell you I offered to make Celeste disappear, that I had people ready to handle the problem permanently? Selene's blood ran cold. She looked at Damian, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. He mentioned it, she lied. And he said no. Chose the legal route even though it was harder and slower and gave her time to nearly blow up a building. Matteo turned back to Damian. You're softer than I raised you to be. Yes, Damian agreed. I am. Good. The word came out surprised. Being hard didn't make me happy, made me powerful and feared and rich, but not happy. He coughed again. You're building something better than I ever did. Don't let anyone tell you different. Even you? Especially me. I spent 40 years building an empire on fear.
You're spending your life dismantling mine and building something that actually helps people. That's not weakness, son. That's correction. Damian's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. I'm sorry I wasted your money, he said quietly. The $5 million. I know you expected me to build something bigger with it. I expected you to become me. You didn't. That's worth more than money. Matteo gripped his son's shoulder with a hand that shook slightly. Make something good out of the bad I gave you. That's all any father can hope for. He left before Damian could respond, shuffling slowly toward the elevator with the careful steps of someone whose body was betraying him one day at a time. Selene waited until the elevator doors closed before turning to Damian. He offered to kill Celeste?
2 days after she nearly murdered your brother. Said he still had connections. That some problems required permanent solutions. Damian's voice was hollow. I told him no. Told him I was handling it legally. He called me soft. He just called you better. Same thing in his world. Selene thought about that for a moment. About men who built empires on violence and sons who tried to build something different. About the weight of inherited damage and the work it took to transform it into something useful. Do you regret it? She asked. Saying no to him? Every time I think about what Celeste did to Danny. Every time I remember that she almost killed 300 people. Damian moved to the windows, looked out at the snow-covered streets. But then I remember that choosing violence would have made me exactly what she accused me of being. So no, I don't regret it. I just wish the right choice didn't feel so much like weakness sometimes. It's not weakness. Tell that to the part of me that's still my father's son. Selene moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. The part of you that's your father's son is the part that fights. The part that protects people you love. The part that refuses to quit when things get impossible. She caught his hand. The difference is what you're fighting for. Your father fought for power. You're fighting for something that matters. Is there a difference? Yes, and you know it. That's why you're still here instead of running his social club in Red Hook. Damian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My father is dying. The doctors say 6 weeks, maybe 8. He wants me there at the end. Will you go? I don't know. Part of me wants to. Wants to make peace before he's gone. But another part, the part that spent 15 years trying to be different from him, wonders if making peace is the same as forgiving. And I don't know if I can forgive him for what he was. You don't have to forgive him to witness his death. You just have to decide whether you want that closure or not. What would you do? Selene thought about Marcus and his betrayal, about Lauren and her excuses, about Celeste and her broken rage, about all the people who'd hurt her over the past 6 months and whether any of them deserve forgiveness. I'd go, she said finally, not because he deserves it, but because you deserve to say goodbye on your terms instead of living with regret about what you didn't do. Damian looked at her with something soft in his eyes. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between climbing an elevator shaft and watching you talk down a terrorist. Trauma builds character. He laughed, and it was the first genuine sound of joy she'd heard from him all day. They stood there watching the snow fall while the clinic hummed with activity around them. Doctors seeing patients, nurses administering medications, families waiting for appointments that would happen because this place existed. I love you, Damian said quietly. I don't think I've actually said that out loud yet. Selene's breath caught. You haven't. Well, I do. Love you, I mean. Have since probably the day you walked into my office looking like your world had ended and somehow made me believe that ending could be a beginning. That's very poetic for someone who claims to be his father's son. I contain multitudes. Apparently, Selene turned to face him fully. I love you too. Even though you're complicated and damaged and occasionally make decisions that terrify me. Only occasionally? I'm being generous. He kissed her there in the empty conference room, while snow fell over Queens and 3 floors below. Patients received care they couldn't get anywhere else. And Selene thought that maybe this was what redemption actually looked like. Not erasing your mistakes, but building something good enough that the mistakes stopped defining you. To kiss. 6 weeks later, Matteo Virelli died in his sleep at the Red Hook brownstone, where he'd raised his son and run his empire. Damian got the call at 4 in the morning. Selene woke to find him sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at his phone like it had just delivered news from another planet. He's gone, Damian said, his voice empty. Heart finally gave out. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful. I'm sorry. Are you? He was a criminal who destroyed lives for profit. He was also your father. Damian was quiet for a long moment. Then he started crying, silent tears that ran down his face, while his shoulders shook and his breath came in gasps. Selene held him while he broke apart. This man who'd spent his whole life being strong, finally letting himself grieve the complicated monster who'd raised him. The funeral was small. Just Damian, Selene, a handful of old men from the social club who looked like they'd stepped out of a Scorsese film, and a priest who'd known Matteo for 40 years and seemed genuinely sad about his passing. They buried him in Greenwood Cemetery under gray March skies that threatened rain, but never quite delivered. The priest said words about redemption and eternal rest that felt hollow, given what Matteo had been. The old men from the social club stood with their hands folded, faces carved from stone, witnesses to the end of an era. Damian didn't speak during the service, just stood there, holding Selene's hand while they lowered his father into ground that had already swallowed generations of men who'd built empires and left damage in their wake. After, one of the old men approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered despite being in his 70s, with scars on his knuckles that told stories Selene probably didn't want to know. Your father was a good man, he said to Damian. No, he wasn't, Damian replied evenly. He was effective and loyal and occasionally generous, but he wasn't good. The old man's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. You're right. He wasn't. But he loved you. That counted for something. Did it? Ask yourself if you'd be who you are without him, then decide whether his love counted. The man nodded once and walked away, back toward a car that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Selene watched him go, then turned to Damian. Are you okay? I don't know. Ask me in a year. They drove back to Manhattan in silence. Damian stared out the window at the city passing by, the Brooklyn neighborhoods he'd grown up in, the projects and corner stores and social clubs where his father had built his legacy. Selene let him process, understanding that some grief needed space more than words. When they got back to her apartment, Damian went straight to the liquor cabinet and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. My father left me everything, he said without preamble. The brownstone, the social club, accounts in the Caymans that I didn't even know existed, probably $10 million total, and all of it dirty. Selene's stomach dropped. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. Legally, I can't refuse an inheritance, but I also can't touch that money without becoming exactly what I've spent 15 years trying not to be. So you donate it. To what? No legitimate charity will touch money they know came from organized crime, and using it for the foundation just taints everything we've built. He drank the whiskey in one long swallow, poured another. There's a third option, Selene said carefully. Which is? You turn it over to the FBI. Tell them everything you know about where it came from and how your father operated. Let them use it to dismantle what's left of his network. Damian's hand froze halfway to his mouth. You want me to inform on my dead father. I want you to stop being defined by him. And as long as that money exists, as long as you're sitting on accounts he filled with blood money, you're still connected to what he was. She moved to stand in front of him. Cut the cord, Damian, completely. Tell the FBI everything and walk away clean. That makes me a rat. That makes you honest. Selene caught his face in both hands, made him look at her. Your father is dead. The men he worked with are dying. The empire he built is already crumbling. You turning over his money doesn't betray him. It just finishes what you started 15 years ago when you decided to be different. The people from his world will never forgive me. Do you care? Damian thought about that for a long moment. Then he set down his glass and pulled out his phone. Who are you calling? The FBI field office. I'm pretty sure they'll be very interested in what I have to tell them. He made the call. Look. The meeting with federal investigators happened 3 days later in a secure office in Lower Manhattan. Damian walked in with a lawyer and walked out 6 hours later having given testimony about 40 years of organized crime operations, names of associates, locations of assets, and detailed financial records he'd found in his father's safe. The FBI agent who'd conducted the interview, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Martinez, shook his hand afterward. This is enough to take down 3 major operations, she said. You just saved us years of investigation. Will I have to testify? Damian asked. Probably not. Most of the people involved are too old or too dead to prosecute. But the asset forfeiture alone will be substantial. She paused. For what it's worth, what you're doing takes courage. Not many people are willing to dismantle their father's legacy. It's not courage, it's self-preservation. Martinez smiled slightly. Same thing sometimes. Damian and Selene left the federal building and walked aimlessly through the financial district, both processing what had just happened. I just destroyed my father's life's work, Damian said finally. You freed yourself from it. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it feels like I just betrayed someone who's not alive to defend himself. Selene stopped walking, made him face her on a street corner while tourists and business people flowed around them. Your father had 40 years to defend himself. He chose not to. He chose to build something illegal and violent, and he chose to involve you in it by giving you that money. She gripped his arms. You don't owe him loyalty to a legacy that hurt people. You owe yourself the chance to finally be free of it. What if I'm not capable of being free? What if this is who I am, my father's son, doomed to either continue his work or spend my life destroying it? Then you keep destroying it until there's nothing left to destroy, and then you build something new in the empty space. Selene's voice was fierce. You're not doomed to anything, Damian. You're just a person who made mistakes and is working very hard to fix them. That's called being human, not being cursed. Damian pulled her into a hug fierce enough to hurt. I don't know what I'd do without you, he said against her hair. Probably something dramatically self-destructive. Good thing you're stuck with me. Is that what we are? Stuck with each other? For the foreseeable future, yes. He laughed, and it sounded like relief. Spring came slowly to New York, winter refusing to release its grip until mid-April, when the trees finally budged green and the city remembered what warmth felt like. The foundation opened 2 more clinics, one in the Bronx, one in Newark. Donor contributions stabilized. Patient outcomes improved. Elizabeth Hartman announced a partnership with 3 medical schools to provide training rotations at foundation clinics, creating a pipeline of doctors committed to serving underserved communities. Damian testified before a Senate subcommittee about healthcare access and systemic barriers. His testimony went viral. A 5-minute clip of him explaining that his mother died because poverty made her invisible to a system designed to serve people with money, not people with need. The clip got 20 million views in 3 days. Senators from both parties reached out about potential legislation. Healthcare advocacy groups asked him to join their boards. The foundation's waiting list tripled. And through it all, Damian and Selene worked side by side, building something that looked less like redemption and more like actual progress. On a Tuesday in late April, Selene walked into Damian's office to find him staring at an envelope with a Brooklyn postmark. "What's that?" she asked. "Letter from one of my father's associates. The old man from the funeral." He opened it carefully, pulled out a single sheet of paper. "He says I did the right thing turning over the money. Says my father would have been proud even if he never could have admitted it. Do you believe that?" "I don't know. Maybe. My father was complicated." Damian set the letter aside. "But it doesn't matter what he would have thought. What matters is that I can finally sleep without dreaming about loan sharks and broken kneecaps. That's progress. Small victories." Selene moved around his desk, sat on the edge close enough that their knees touched. "I have news," she said. "Good or bad?" "Depends on your perspective. Marcus is getting married." Damian's eyebrows rose. "To Lauren?" "No, someone new. A paralegal he met through his lawyer during the whole police complaint disaster." Selene pulled out her phone, showed him the engagement announcement someone had forwarded. "They're apparently very happy together." "How do you feel about that?" Selene thought about it honestly. About the man she'd spent 3 years building a life with. About how devastated she'd been finding him with Lauren. About how much had changed in the 6 months since. "I feel nothing," she said finally. "Not angry, not hurt, not vindicated. Just nothing. He's a person I used to know who made choices that hurt me, and now he's someone else's problem. That's remarkably healthy. Or remarkably numb. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." Damian smiled. "What about Celeste? Any news there?" She's in a psychiatric facility in Connecticut. According to her lawyer, she'll be there at least 3 more years, maybe longer depending on how treatment goes. Selene paused. Her foundation was completely dissolved. All the money she'd stolen is being returned to donors or redirected to actual charitable work. Good. You don't sound convinced. I'm convinced it's the right outcome. I'm just not convinced it fixes anything. She's still broken, still damaged by whatever made her think destroying me was worth destroying herself. You can't fix everyone, Damian. I know. Doesn't stop me from wishing I could. Selene caught his hand, laced their fingers together. You're fixing things that matter, the clinics, the patients, yourself. She squeezed gently. That has to be enough. Is it? Enough, I mean? Ask me in a year. He laughed at that, laughed at her throwing his words back at him. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just existing together in the space they'd carved out of chaos and crisis and impossible choices. I want to show you something, Damian said finally. Something I've been working on. He pulled out his laptop, opened a folder filled with architectural renderings. What is this? Selene asked. A hospital, full service, 300 beds, designed specifically for low-income communities. Pediatric wing. Cancer treatment center. Surgical suites. He scrolled through images. I want to build it in Sunset Park, where my mother died, where the first clinic opened. Selene's breath caught. This is massive. How would we fund it? We wouldn't, not as the foundation. I'd do it personally. Use money from selling my company shares, corporate partnerships, private donations from people who actually care. He looked at her. It would take 5 years minimum, maybe 10. And it would consume most of my time and energy and money, but I think it might actually change things. It would definitely change things. Is that a yes? I didn't realize you were asking. I'm asking. Damian turned to face her fully. Will you help me build this? Will you spend the next decade working impossible hours for a project that might fail? Will you put up with my obsession and my damage and my inability to do anything halfway? Selene looked at the renderings, at the ambitious plans laid out in precise detail, at the man who'd spent his whole life trying to atone for $5 million in dirty money by building something clean. Only if you marry me first, she heard herself say. Damian froze. What? You heard me? I'm not spending 10 years building a hospital with someone who's only my boyfriend. I want legal commitment. I want the security of knowing you can't just walk away when things get hard. That's the most unromantic proposal I've ever heard. Good thing I'm not proposing then. I'm negotiating. Selene smiled. So what's it going to be, Verelli? Do we do this properly, or do I find another healthcare mogul to build impossible things with? Damian stared at her for a long moment. Then he started laughing, deep, genuine laughter that filled the office. You're insane, he said. That's not an answer. Yes, obviously yes. I'll marry you, I'll build hospitals with you, I'll do whatever impossible thing you want as long as I get to do it beside you. He kissed her there in his office, with architectural renderings spread across his desk and the city humming beyond the windows. And Selene thought that maybe this was what happy endings actually looked like. Not perfect, not clean, just 2 damaged people choosing each other and deciding that was enough. They got married 6 months later on a rocky beach in Maine with 30 people watching and the Atlantic Ocean providing soundtrack. Danny walked Selene down the aisle, or down the beach, technically. Her parents cried. Damian's eyes were bright when she reached him. Elizabeth Hartman officiated because she was the only person both of them trusted to make it meaningful without making it overly sentimental. The vows were simple. I promise to fight beside you, Selene said, to call you on your bullshit, to remind you that being broken doesn't make you irredeemable, and to build impossible things with you until we're too old to lift hammers. I promise to protect you without trying to control you, Damian said, to be honest even when it hurts, to keep trying to be better than I was yesterday, and to love you even when you're being impossible, which is frequently. They exchanged rings, simple platinum bands that caught the late afternoon sun. Elizabeth pronounced them married, and the small crowd applauded while waves crashed and seabirds circled overhead. The reception was at a small inn overlooking the water, lobster and champagne and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. Patricia gave a toast about how she'd never seen two people more determined to save each other. Chen talked about finding meaning in chaos. Reeves just raised her glass and said, "To surviving your worst decisions and building something better from the wreckage." Selene danced with Danny, who told her he was proud of her, and also relieved she'd finally found someone who could keep up with her particular brand of intensity. Damian danced with Mrs. Chen, who told him his mother would have been proud, and also would have smacked him for taking so long to find someone worth marrying. And late in the evening, when most of the guests had drifted away and the Atlantic had turned dark except for moonlight on the waves, Selene and Damian stood on the beach alone. "We did it," she said. "We survived, you mean?" "Same thing." "Is it?" He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Because surviving suggests we just didn't die. I'd like to think we did more than that." "Fine. We thrived. We built things. We turned the worst moments of our lives into something that matters." She looked up at him. "Better?" "Much." They stood there wrapped around each other while the ocean breathed and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere back in New York, 8 clinics served thousands of patients who had nowhere else to go. "Do you ever regret it?" Damian asked quietly. "Walking into my office that day, instead of just going home and falling apart?" Selene thought about that morning 6 months ago, about Marcus and his betrayal, about mascara running down her face, about the moment Damian had looked at her and asked who made her cry, cracking through every wall she'd built. "No," she said. "I don't regret it. That was the worst morning of my life, and also the beginning of everything good that came after." "Even the parts where we almost died?" "Especially those parts. They made the survival more interesting." Damian laughed and kissed her temple. "I love you," he said, "even though you're reckless and stubborn and occasionally make decisions that terrify me." "Only occasionally?" "I'm being generous." "Good. Because I love you too, even though you're complicated and damaged and still working through approximately 40 years of inherited trauma." "That's fair." They stood there until the cold drove them inside. Two people who'd met at their lowest points and somehow built something beautiful from the wreckage. 5 years later, the Verelli Memorial Hospital opened its doors in Sunset Park. 300 beds, state-of-the-art equipment, partnerships with every major medical school in the region, a pediatric wing painted in bright colors with murals designed by local artists, a cancer treatment center where care was provided based on need, not ability to pay. The opening ceremony drew thousands. Patients from the original clinics, donors who'd watched the project grow from architectural renderings to actual building, politicians who'd supported the legislative changes that made it possible, medical professionals who'd committed to working there specifically because they believed in the mission. Damian gave the keynote speech standing in the lobby where a plaque read, "In memory of Anna Virelli, who died so others might live better. My mother never got to see me become who I am now," he said, his voice carrying through the crowd. "She died before I'd built anything worth being proud of, before I'd figured out how to turn the damage I inherited into something useful, before I'd met the woman who would teach me that redemption isn't about erasing your mistakes, it's about outworking them." He looked at Selene standing in the front row, and his eyes were bright. "This hospital exists because someone I loved died when she shouldn't have, because the system failed her, because I spent 15 years angry about that failure and trying to build something better." He paused. "But it also exists because 6 years ago, a woman walked into my office on the worst day of her life and somehow saw past every terrible thing I'd ever done to the person I was trying to become. And she decided that was worth fighting for." Selene felt tears running down her face and didn't bother wiping them away. "So this hospital is for my mother," Damian continued, "and for everyone like her who deserved better than they got. But it's also for Selene, for believing in impossible things and dragging me toward them even when I tried to run." The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Someone released balloons that drifted up toward the ceiling. And standing there watching her husband cut the ribbon on a building that represented 6 years of impossible work, Selene thought about how far they'd come from that first meeting. From mascara-streaked and heartbroken to standing beside someone who'd turned his worst inheritance into the best possible outcome. From a woman who'd been made disposable to someone who'd helped build something that would outlast both of them. The hospital opened. Patients streamed through doors. Doctors began rounds. Children received treatment. Families found hope in a place designed specifically to provide it. And late that night, after all the ceremonies and celebrations and press interviews, Selene and Damian stood in the empty lobby looking at the plaque bearing his mother's name. "She would have loved this," Selene said quietly. "I hope so. I spent 6 years building it for her. And for yourself. That too." He caught her hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving when everyone else just saw someone damaged beyond repair." Selene turned to face him fully. "You were never damaged beyond repair. You were just someone who needed permission to stop running from who you used to be and start building who you wanted to become." She smiled. "I just gave you that permission." "You did more than that. You gave me a reason." He kissed her there in the lobby they'd built together, under lights that would never go dark as long as someone needed care. And Selene thought that maybe this was what redemption actually looked like at the end. Not perfect, not without scars. Just two people who'd started in darkness and worked their way towards something resembling light. The hospital hummed around them. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, a child was getting chemotherapy that would save her life. Somewhere in the surgical wing, a team was working to repair damage that most hospitals would have written off as too expensive to fix. And in the lobby, beneath a plaque commemorating a woman who'd died too soon, her son and the woman who'd saved him stood together, witnesses to what happened when you decided that your worst day didn't have to define the rest of your life. "We did good," Damian said. "We did," Selene agreed. "Now let's go home." They walked out into the Brooklyn night, hand in hand, two people who'd survived their worst selves and built something better from the wreckage. Behind them, the hospital glowed like a promise, the kind that said, ending can be beginning, damage can be transformed, and love, the real kind, the complicated kind, the kind that fights beside you instead of just holding you, can make even the most broken people whole enough to help others heal. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And that, they both agreed, was more than enough.